in Scarborough, I think you're tuning in today as well. Hope you find it interesting. We'll move on to the minutes then from the last meeting. So if anyone's got any comments on page 1, let me know. Page 2.
Yeah, there's just one, item 4, it's temporary Detective Superintendent Alan Harder.
Thank you. Anything else? Page 3? No? Okay, thank you. Aside from that change then we'll sign those off. Action log. Action 216. I think, Richard, via you, that was Inspector Grange, I think it was it was the rural element of policing being as best embedded in the control room. I think we were sort of concerned about assuming many of their staff come from York City Centre and their knowledge of the inner workings of sort of rural communities and farming and things occasionally shown, I think, on calls. It looks like there's dates planned in for training now from August to October, which is great. My only question was whether that, I don't know the farming calendar very well, whether that's, if there's a sort of peak season before that it might be helpful to have had it in before. But I guess it's as quick as possible at the same time. You know, I don't think they'll have stood on ceremony to have got that in.
Yeah, I was in the Force Control yesterday talking to Chief Inspector Bloxham there about the programme of training and so on moving forward. I think in addition to training, there's other things we can do, and I'll ask Inspector Grange to link in with Chief Inspector Bloxham to do some bite-sized stuff or some briefing type stuff.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. I think we can close that now. It might be interesting to get some sort of feedback on that in future, but we can cross that bridge. 219 safeguarding. I think the next 3 are all about offender management unit actually. So 219 and 220 can both be closed because we've got that information now. We received that from Alan, so thank you very much. 221 is to stay open. That I think is the main action from the last thematic, which was about effectively the governance of the ONU. It moved from criminal justice to safeguarding, and it was whether it should move back again or were the best place for it. So Jenny's board, subgroup of the local criminal justice board, is looking at that, I think, and Alan and others are bringing it.
And I can give an update on that if you
want.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah. So I had a meeting this morning with Alan Harder, Detective Superintendent, and Jenny Newbury. And Alan's working with partners, the CRC and the probation service, and other members of staff internally on IOM and offender management more broadly, as we discussed at the last meeting. He's then linking across with Jenny, and the proposal is to bring a redefined approach to IOM to the BD&I board, not this next one but the one after.
And for the public, the BD&I board, I can't remember what it stands for, but it is
Business Development and Innovation.
Thank you, which is a subgroup of the local criminal justice board, which the PCC chairs. So it's criminal justice coming together to have a look at these things holistically. So that's great. So is there any time frames around that, would you say?
Yeah, so the next BD&I board is tomorrow.
Oh.
The one after that, I think, is 2 months after that. So that's sufficient time for everybody to do the work and then discuss it at that next board.
Fantastic. And it's not on here anymore. We closed it because it was in place, but I think Detective Superintendent Thomas is coming to our office next week or the week after to give us an update on burglary after a thematic about 6 months ago to give an update. So that's in place and soon to be underway, which is great. And I think the plan is to publish the sort of minutes of that meeting on this webpage so people can have a look at what's changed and how things have developed. Okay, that's it for agenda item 2. Agenda item 3, a question from a member of the public. This is where we would normally read out questions and answer them as best as we could. Very gratefully, we've got 24 questions, so rather than spend an hour reading them out and answering them, we will try and, we've grouped them by geography, and we're going to try and weave them into the updates we get from the superintendents covering their areas. It might not be as specific as the questions that we've had in are about very specific communities or very specific issues, but we will try and raise them wider points about drugs or road safety. But we will, as always, answer the questions in a written with a written response on our website as soon as possible. Hopefully by the end of the week, albeit there are 24, so it's going to maybe take us slightly longer. But I think the police side of the house have already supplied sort of draft answers, so hopefully we're not too far off. So I will do my best to sort of throw them in as we go, if that's all right, rather than just read them out and answer them, because I think it would be here all day. So without further ado, we'll start the thematic, which is local policing. Please.
Okay, so I'll start us off. You've already introduced the two commanders. The third one is Superintendent Alistair Day, who covers Scarborough and Rydale. He's not here, but Superintendent Robson will cover off some of the issues related to Scarborough. She's been there recently. So what we aim to do in this presentation is just cover some of the issues that the public mentioned in the consultation for the police and crime plan, and some of the broader issues, and outline how the force as a whole supports local policing, in essence, to protect communities. In terms of the structure of the presentation, we'll talk about local policing generally. We'll talk about the structure of the force in a little bit more detail, the priorities, the districts in more detail, and Paul and Lindsay will cover those points off, and then the broader force support towards the end.
Yeah.
Okay. Will you be asking questions as we go along, or?
What do you think?
Well, I just thought I'd ask the question.
We will. We can't hold it in, Richard. So
Okay. Right. Okay. So what's on the screen there is a map of North Yorkshire and the City of York, and the blue is the area for Scarborough and Rydale, covered by Superintendent Day. The green area is what we commonly call the county area, which is led by Superintendent Paula Booth, and then the red bit is the York and Selby part of the force, which is covered by Superintendent Alice Robson.
I bet you thought you'd get through this slide without a question, didn't you?
Well, I thought that was fairly...
It's obvious to us because we work with it every day, but for the public, why do you group the county in that way? So again, it might make sense for us for York and Selby to be together, but is there a reason why they are in those three particular groups?
Right, okay, that's... So this is rooted in history to a large degree. So obviously North Yorkshire as a whole is covered by North Yorkshire County Council, and then the City of York Council as a unitary authority, and then we have the district local authorities in addition to that. And so over a period of time, what we've realised that is there's a commonality of approach between the policing styles within the Scarborough and Rydale area, the rest of the county, and then the city and indeed Selby. We did try a previous iteration whereby Selby was joined to Harrogate, and that really didn't quite have the right feel, so we've come back to how we are currently. So the commanders are in charge and responsible for the overall policing within the district, and that not only includes operational policing, uniform policing, but also the investigation side as well. So as a member of the public might, what they would call CID, we call it something slightly different, but the investigation side in the district. What I'm going to come on to shortly is just explain a little bit more about how we focus on priorities before we focus onto the local priorities. So North Yorkshire Police has something called a control strategy, and this is something that's done annually every year, and is based on a piece of research called a strategic intelligence assessment. And basically, without getting into jargon, a large piece of work is undertaken between the police and other partners to identify what the key threats are and the key areas of responsibility that we should be focusing on that are emerging both nationally and regionally, as well as locally, that we need to start focusing on to protect the public. And as you will see on the screen there are the current set of control strategy priorities. I don't intend to go through all those in any great detail, but what will jump out probably straight away are priority areas that I would call vulnerability and safeguarding, and those largely are sometimes hidden from the public. So for example, modern slavery, human trafficking, domestic abuse, and so on and so forth, the public going about their day-to-day business might not necessarily be aware of. It's important that we give the public the opportunity to talk to us about their own priorities, which is what we're going to focus on in the meeting as well. And then the second tranche there is reducing community harm, which again are some of the more broader organisational, particularly vulnerability and crime priorities that we work on. Those are managed in quite a structured governance way. So every month we have something called the Force Tasking Meeting, where ISA, ACC review the progress against each of those priorities. All the themes have a lead, a strategic lead, and they outline the approach that we're taking to managing those priorities. And there's a problem-solving plan that sits behind each priority, and a quite a detailed profile to assist the problem plan owners as well.
And are the priorities prioritised? Are some of those more time and energy spent on them than others?
No, there's a commonality between them all. They're not ranked, so each is given relevant resource depending on need. Okay. The next slide is again a map of North Yorkshire on the City of York, and then that outlines, people might not be able to see it very clearly because there's a lot of detail on there, but that's quite simply an extract from the police and crime plan, and that's part of the consultation that was taken in May 2017 by your office with the public. Over 2,000 members of the public responded to that consultation.
Yeah, and I just get it for the public's point of view. So you were talking about the control strategy, which is effectively what the police know to be the case and what's necessary. Largely what the police and crime plan does is sort of flip that on its head and find out from the public what they want to do. We then combine that with all the police information, come up with a police and crime plan. So we do get a balanced approach as to what the public is saying is important to them, things like burglary and those kind of things. But what might be hidden like human slavery that is going on and where it might be happening, and bringing those together to have one strategy for North Yorkshire.
Yeah. So we'll come into some more detail shortly about the local priorities. There are some themes that will emerge obviously during the course of the conversation that are outlined in the police and crime plan, things like cross-border crime for example, things like antisocial behaviour and so on. During the presentation then, I'll outline about the local police structure and how we're tackling those, but also then towards the end of the presentation talk about how the broader force supports some of the local priorities such as the Rural Policing Task Force, the Organised Crime Unit, the ANPR, and so on and so forth.
And for an example, so road safety I think comes up in almost all of those areas, if not all of them. But of course, whilst you will take some local action, there are forced responses to that, like community speed watching and safety camera vans that mean it's not just what's in your particular patch that's important, it's the approach.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point to make, because sometimes public don't quite comprehend actually there's a big team of people around policing North Yorkshire. It's not just the PCSO or the PC attached to that ward or working within that village or town. We have centralised units that we task based on our own tasking processes to tackle some of the priorities. So, for example, in terms of some of the road safety issues, we will task particular aspects of the force to support the local teams to deal with those as situations arise. The next slide, I just want to touch on neighbourhood policing, because I think neighbourhood policing is really important to the public. So when we talk about neighbourhood policing, these are those officers and staff members that are assigned to particular localities within the force, very often down to particular ward level. So the table that's on the screen there shows the distribution of inspectors, sergeants, PCs and PCSOs that currently, the establishment currently undertakes neighbourhood policing within North Yorkshire. That was based on the methodology we adopted from the Giordano Institute called the Vulnerability Locality Index, and that current structure is put in place in April of 2017.
A couple of questions. One, could you just tell the public what neighbourhood policing means compared to response and investigations? How's that split up? So what do those people do on that table, that 200 odd?
So the primary focus of neighbourhood policing is to have ownership of local issues. It's about engaging with the public. It's about problem solving activities to tackle antisocial behaviour, crime and other local issues. But problem solving activity in partnership with other organisations, not just necessarily from a policing perspective. So it's about engagement, it's about problem solving activity.
So it's largely things that can't, the flip of what we talked about earlier, that can't be resolved by a force-wide response to things that is local to that street, and therefore we need to work with those people to find what the solution is.
And then if things begin to escalate that the local teams aren't capable of dealing with, they will then escalate that up to the area commander for additional resource and support from the broader team within the district. And if the area commander doesn't have sufficient resource, they will escalate it up to a force level for further support from force assets. And if indeed the force needs more support, we can go to region and other collaborative arrangements as well. So it's quite a good way to scale up and down. Okay.
Just in respect of that though, I suppose it's about the longer term problem solving with the community.
Yeah.
So it's not about policing coming in and deciding what's best for that community. It's about working with them, what will work, because everything's different in different areas of the county, as you'll see from the individual area commander updates. And it's not just turning up every night and dealing with the same problem, but how can we actually deal with the root causes of those problems?
So Tom's much better at the terminology than me, but certainly an ambition in our office is to try and approach things in a certainly collaborative sense, but looking forward. So what if there is a problem in Village X? What do you want the village to look like in a couple of years?
Yeah.
How can we help you get there? So we
Yeah.
don't have this problem, rather than you tell us there's a problem, we try and respond, and it's a sort of
Yes.
cycle that just goes on forever. Whereas if we can meet a, set a vision and try and get there, difficult, but then hopefully those things will resolve.
And this is something that I think we're going to come on to later, is about the community hubs and so on, because obviously a lot of the work that you're talking about there is actually more the responsibility of local authorities and other partners that we work
Yeah.
with, rather than
Yeah.
specifically the police who are dealing with the
Yes.
crime aspects of it.
And it's all the early intervention prevention, and that then links into some of the institute work that links to the vulnerabilities localities index.
Yes, and you might not be able to answer this question. Hadn't struck me. I know obviously you reviewed this not so long ago. It might be interesting to talk about what's changed in any of those numbers and if there's any more or less people in neighbourhood policing. But on the matrix, there's those list of 6 things that help dictate how many people you need to deal with those problems.
Yes.
It strikes me, and this might not be true, but it strikes me that certainly 3, 4 and 5 would seem to be more weighted towards an urban type setting than a rural type one, which would characterise North Yorkshire Police by and large. And a particular burglary dwelling, if that doesn't mean dwelling itself, I know it changed recently in terms of recording, but whether outbuildings are farm buildings or dwellings or not, it just struck me that do we need to look at that and make sure it is as applicable to North Yorkshire as we might have first thought, then the Jill Dando Institute might, through no fault of their own, might be looking at London, for example, as some of their basis for some of this stuff, which might not be as helpful as...
Yes, I can answer that, no problem at all.
Great.
So the intention of the force is to review resourcing annually. When we did this, whilst we applied the VLI, we also did sessions with each of the commanders to sit down and get a professional feel also. One of the key headline things around neighbourhood policing was that we recognised that we needed to put more resource into Scarborough. So we put more PCSOs, more police officers into Scarborough. Lindsay might come on to that shortly because she was Deputy Commander there previously. The totality of resources within neighbourhood policing have remained the same. So the same number of police officers before and after. What we essentially did was just cut the pipe slightly differently. In terms of the PCSOs, again there was some realignment of PCSO numbers predominantly towards the Scarborough area. What we try to do is get a sense of ownership of teams as well, so we have a very clear structure of an inspector being responsible for a smaller area. So for example, we have an inspector responsible for policing at Rydale and Whitby, then supported by sergeants, supported by PCs and PCSOs, and increasingly volunteers as well, as we broaden the policing family, and special constables. So there's absolute accountability and clarity up to the commander and up to myself and up to the chief constable. So numbers will be reviewed because things change. I think in terms of the model that was applied at the time, that was the best evidence base and the best research one available at the time, I think, for North York.
Yeah, and I think it reflects some of the wider concerns. So Julia also chairs the National Crime Network, that often some of these measures are inherently based on open information, because that's where sort of academics and charities and other things tend to have gathered information from in the past, so it's sort of self-fulfilling in the end. But it just, as I say, it just struck me it might be worth looking at and making sure we're confident that it represents rural policing as we might know it. And I guess that's where your contact with the commanders on the professional judgment bit comes in, to say that's what it says, but does it feel, this is what the matrix would say you need in your area? Does it feel like that though?
Yeah, and to be completely open about this, when you apply a methodology like that, a lot of North Yorkshire is covered by fields.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But we cannot leave areas of the county unpoliced, you know, and so there are areas where, you know, we've taken a professional judgment to ensure there's a policing coverage for those areas. But if we were just to do it based on risk and threat and so on, that would be less so, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we recognise the importance of rural issues and engaging with the public. Okay.
Fraser. Sorry, just a quick one. Thanks, Richard, for that. That's really helpful. In terms of the fifth variable on there, could you explain why the inclusion of the 15 to 24-year-olds is that as a result of their likelihood to be victims of crime, involved in the commission of crime, or both?
I think as victims and perpetrators of crime, yeah, we recognise that that cohort of individuals have particular needs, which bring particular challenges for policing. The Deputy Chief Constable just mentioned about prevention and early intervention work, and that's something we've really motored on in NYP over the course of the last 2 years. So, yeah.
Thank you. On the back of that, Richard, again, it's a question really for Jill Dano Institute rather than you, but we tend to think about the older population as well as being particularly vulnerable to some types of crime and or missing from homes and other things. Again, when it does get reviewed, it's whether it's worth looking at against some other measures that we think are more give a better picture of North Yorkshire than
I think it's a valid point. I think increasingly, not just policing, but a broad range of public sector organisations are beginning to, not that we haven't realised even more, the importance of that population as well. Yeah, so for example, we're doing a lot of work with a system called Mosaic. Our analysts are, so we're able to tease out where particular communities live within North Yorkshire. So we're able to then take a slightly more sophisticated approach to some of our interventions. Mosaic is a demographic profiling tool which essentially shows where various segments of the population live.
Great, thank you.
Okay. The next slide, we've touched on it already. I just wanted to mention about one of our partnership ways of approaching local policing, neighbourhood policing, and that's through our community safety partnership hubs. So for a couple of years now, we've been working with particularly local authorities, district-based local authorities and other partners under the governance of the community safety partnership for the county to embed something that we've called community safety partnership hubs. They are called slightly different things in areas of the county. So for example at Scarborough, I think it's called the impact team, community impact team, but the common terminology is community safety team. And essentially what that is a group of co-located people, so police, local authorities and others, working together on joint problems. So rather than issues just coming to a single agency, so for example antisocial behaviour, and the police just focusing on an intervention there, actually that issue is coming to a range of partners who are working together to take a problem solving approach to that, to work on it. That's the sort of the broad brush approach to it. What we've adopted in North Yorkshire Police is I suppose a slightly different approach for each district. So for example, looking down the list there at Scarborough, the entirety of the Scarborough Neighbourhood Policing team are based within the Scarborough Borough Council building at King Street there, working alongside the community safety manager and her team and other people who come in, in a very effective way. That's probably the Rolls-Royce approach that we've got currently within the county. At Selby, there we have 3 officers located, so 2 officers and 1 PCSO, working with a local authority, and they have quite a good tasking process in there. And again, that works very effectively. Hambleton, 1 North Yorkshire police officer working out of Hambleton District Council offices, again with Gina Allen, the community safety manager, and other people from other partnership agencies, all working along similar lines, adopting the same methodology, predominantly around antisocial behaviour and issues that we call public safety and welfare issues within policing. Richmondshire, similar approach to Hambleton. Craven similarly. Harrogate, slightly more enhanced version there. We have 3 officers co-located with Harrogate Council, 2 PCs and a PCSO. You'd expect that because the demand's slightly higher than some of the more rural areas. York, again we have a sergeant and 6 officers working out of West offices, which are the council offices at York. working alongside the local authority. And Rydale don't have a hub as such, but we have a very strong partnership, working relationship with Rydale Council there, and they adopt something called the MAPS process, the multi-agency problem-solving process. So there's quite a cohesive arrangement across there. And the reason I've introduced this at the start, well not at the start, midway through, the discussion on local policing, is just to demonstrate how some of the issues that we're going to talk about later aren't just necessarily a policing issue. It's the police, North Yorkshire Police, working alongside the local authority, the fire service, the ex other agency.
Yeah. Well, very rarely can the police resolve something on their own.
Okay. Richard, just because obviously there is a bit of a difference between the different models that are being across the county. And obviously, I've been to a few of them myself. There's some excellent practice, especially in the Scarborough hub, in particular, potentially. Can you just say a bit about, just to reassure people out there that it isn't just a kind of a lesser model in some places, about how you're trying to make sure that best practice is adopted in other areas and that there's learning across the board, so that we are constantly developing that. Just could you say a bit about how that's happening?
No problem at all. So very early on in this process, we recognised that Community Safety Partnership, which is a strategic board across the county, should have some governance, some oversight of how this is all working. So the way we do some of the things that you just outlined, Tom, is there's something called a Joint Coordinating Group that sits under the CSP umbrella, which is made up of members of the police, the local authorities and other agencies, and they meet very regularly to discuss key themes about, for example, information sharing, case management systems, some of the legal issues. So there's a real sort of good spread of ideas and governance. Above and beyond that, we hold regular workshops, 2 or 3 each year, involving the practitioners from each of the hubs that come together. Inspector Joe Brooksbank, who's part of the Partnership Hub, leads on that. So we have an inspector that's got quite a good oversight at a tactical level over how all the hubs are working, and does clever things like the things I just outlined there, the workshops to bring people together to get the good practice going. So it's working quite well actually. A number of forces have tried this, but I think the particular challenge for us in North Yorkshire has been as you've outlined, well, is the rurality of the county, because this works very well in a really urban environment, hence Scarborough and York. The challenge for us has been, well, actually, we want to ensure that the more rural areas get the same benefits from integrated partnership working, co-location and so on, which I think we've achieved by and large, and this will, in my view, will continue to grow over coming years.
I was going to ask Richard, you don't need to name names, but having been to Scarborough many times, that is the best. I'm happy to say that is the best version, and they continue to try and improve as well. But I presume, well, I don't necessarily presume, are you trying to make more progress in some areas than others that are now all about in place or in place, but are there some that you still think there's a few more steps we can go before you're sort of really happy with how things are going there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, last year I went around each of the hubs, visiting each of the police officers that was working there, talking to the council staff, and I think it's safe to say different localities are on a different part of the journey really. They've all got their own challenges and what have you, but I suppose the positive thing I want to just mention is everybody's willing and able to take part in this, despite some of the other budgetary constraints or despite some of the other issues that might be going on, because I think collectively people see the benefit. And I think that's one of the strengths of working in North Yorkshire. From a policing perspective, we work well with partner agencies, and they support us and we support them. I wouldn't wish to highlight any particular district. So to say it's running well.
I mean, from a rural perspective, there are challenges on all of our public sector organisations because of, when you look at demand and threat and risk, people quite rightly align their resources to where that demand, threat and risk is, but that means that the rural element of our community perhaps don't receive as full a service, and I suppose that's what you're talking about. Best practice in Scarborough, you'd love to replicate that everywhere, but the demand and threat isn't there. So a lot of partnership working now is expanding out to the third sector, and our voluntary sector. So there's some fantastic examples of social prescribing. So some of the elements of vulnerability can actually be dealt with through people living in that community who want to volunteer, and they live and care about that rural community. So that helps to provide a bespoke service to maybe some of those areas that don't have the threats and demands, and we can build partnerships to be bespoke and fit for purpose in those communities.
You're right. And often it's not always, you move away from crime a bit more to sort of well-being and loneliness and isolation and those things that people can still help with, can't they? And,
Absolutely.
and prevent certain crimes from happening, essentially.
Yeah.
And I guess it's probably worth mentioning in that breath that we've recently started a Community Connectors project, haven't we? Whereby local people can actually volunteer with the police to do exactly that in their local communities. I guess we should put a plug in for that, because if anybody's interested, they can get in touch. I know we're just piloting it at the moment, but we are looking to roll it out in the future, so worth mentioning that.
I think it's a good point. You know, our neighbourhood policing teams, I mentioned earlier, inspectors, sergeants, PCs, PCSOs, increasingly volunteers. We have a number of volunteers now, you know, with North Yorkshire Police, working on rural issues, such as Rural Watch, for example. We have volunteers doing what a role called neighbourhood support volunteers, so they're working alongside PCSOs, doing some of the surveying work, doing some of the property marking, doing some of the leafleting, doing some of the stuff you've just been talking about, Tom. You know, so increasingly that, you know, we're not reducing police officer numbers or PCSO numbers, we're enhancing the service we're providing. So, and that's come on quite significantly over the course of the last year. Happy to move on?
Yep.
Okay, good. We're now going to talk about Scarborough and Rydale, which Superintendent Robson's going to talk to you about her previous capacity as Deputy District Commander Cluster.
Thank you. Okay, so this slide starts with the police and crime plan priorities for Scarborough and Rydale, which are a direct lift from the document that Mr Anderson showed earlier. We'll cover working with the most vulnerable in society to reduce harm, especially from drugs and including those with mental ill health. Mobile working to help officers spend more time in communities and better use of technology to counter serious organised crime. And effective collaboration to improve community and road safety. How North Yorkshire Police deploy and respond to traditional policing demand which concerns the public the most, such as burglary and antisocial behaviour. And the bottom of that slide just gives a summary really of what the area is like. So Scarborough and Rydale form one command with a variety of different concerns from the public. Scarborough, which is obviously North Yorkshire's coastal region, also covers rural and isolated villages and farms in the North York Moors National Park. Physically isolated on the east coast, it has some of the most socio-economically deprived communities in North Yorkshire, and Alistair and his team are building stronger partnership working across the area using neighbourhood policing teams and the community impact team to good effect, and I think we'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. So the next slide shows the establishment in terms of the staffing for the command. So you'll see there's a summary there: one superintendent, uniform chief inspector and detective chief inspector. You then have the officer totals for the response staff, so that's inspectors, sergeants and PCs. Similarly for the investigation hub, and then for the serious crime team.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so the community impact team at Scarborough, as we've already touched on, is one of the community safety hubs and arguably the most developed in North Yorkshire. Co-located multi-agency team based within the council building and consists of North Yorkshire Police and PCSOs, Scarborough Borough Council officers, North Yorkshire County Council Community Cohesion Officer, Community Angels, Changing Lives outreach programme, Street Triage, Mental Health Services, Yorkshire Coast Homes, which is the biggest registered social landlord for the East Coast, the Fire Service and Yorkshire Ambulance. The team operate by having a weekly...
Yeah, you're back to answer my question.
The team operate by having a weekly tasking meeting through which any agency can refer in, and the threshold for referral is that the issue that they're trying to deal with is too big for that agency on its own. So it's a very, very basic referral mechanism. Cases are referred into the team and discussed in detail at the weekly tasking meeting. They operate a joint decision model, which is essentially a formula for making decisions, but it's taken completely out of the policing context, and all the policey language and jargon's taken out of that, and that allows them to have a joint risk assessment, so that everybody's really clear in terms of what the issues are that are being dealt with. And they'll then discuss the powers and policy, and it's at that point that a lead agency would be identified. So it's whichever agency would have the most powers and policies to be able
And
to
so it won't always be
action.
the police, it could be anybody.
Absolutely, absolutely. And from that will come a shared action plan which is specific for that issue or that case or that person that they're trying to deal with. Those taskings are then reviewed on a weekly basis, and partners are held to account for what they've signed up to do the previous week. At the start,
Who does that? Who does? Because accountability must be complex if there's 10 plus agencies in a room. Is that the community? So I sort of know how it works, but for the public, how do you sort of say, well, ambulance, you haven't done your end of the stick, or whatever it might be?
so the meetings are generally chaired by the Community Safety Partnership Manager, or in their absence by the police inspector or the sergeant from the team.
Okay.
But actually, the will from all agencies is there. And very, very rarely, in my experience across there, have we ever had to really hold other partners to account for not delivering. Cases are risk assessed when they come into the team and given a score, with obviously the idea that once the joined up cohesive action plan's been put in place, we could put it through the same risk assessment model and that score should have declined. So that's the process in which cases are referred in and how they're assessed. I think it's really important that as well as the statutory agencies attending that weekly meeting, you've also got voluntary sector that are present too, and they're absolutely key to the delivery of some of this. When I left Scarborough, which was in June of last year, there were over 45 agencies represented at that meeting on a weekly basis, and they're either co-located within the town hall building or they're hot desk in that office. So in terms of that real-time effective information sharing, it really is a really brilliant model. One of the key pieces of work that the community impact team have led on is something called Operation Ambience. It's one of several strands of interventions that the team are delivering in relation to vulnerability and antisocial behaviour, but it's particularly aimed at identifying and supporting young people and adults at risk, and it's very much an early help and prevention approach. So as well as identifying, targeting and disrupting those that are exploiting them, the coordination is through partnership tasking meetings which are held within the council building.
And having seen it in action, Lindsay, are they the sort of young people that otherwise might not have come to the attention of the police, or that maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago they would have stayed in an agency of some kind?
Yes, absolutely, and what you find is that sometimes police activity might have an adverse consequence on another partner agency, so by agreeing joint action where everybody's in the same room, everyone's clear on everybody's perspectives and priorities, actually it's a far more efficient way of doing business.
And the education part of it, I know education can often be difficult because they're so busy and it's complex sort of structure to get into some of those sort of multi-agency meetings. Are education involved where appropriate?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So Operation Ambience has been a strong focus of the team in terms of targeting antisocial behaviour, but that's not office based, it's the team deploying out on the street, so they'll work late shifts, they'll work weekends, and they'll be where they need to be to effectively tackle those issues, and that's then followed up with the home visits, not just targeting necessarily the youths that we've encountered involved in the antisocial behaviour, but also looking at the next generation as well, so who else is living within that family home, what support or intervention might we be able to put in place to prevent them becoming the next cohort of ASB perpetrators.
And I know mapping prevention is very difficult. Do you feel like, even anecdotally, whether you've got the sort of scientific evidence or not, that some of that work to stop people entering crime or ASB or whatever it might be is starting to sort of embed a bit more? Because it's really hard to know whether it's successful or not, but you might just see things.
And some of these points, as you rightly say, if we get some of this stuff right, we won't actually see the results of that for 5 or 10 or 15 years, so it is really difficult to measure, but I can tell you that anecdotally it feels different.
Good.
Which I think is really positive. The next operation that the team focus on is something called Operation Contribute. This is about identifying and supporting children and adults who are at risk from exploitation, identifying and disrupting those that are exploiting them, and identifying locations that are being used to exploit or commit crime, so hotspot policing essentially, with appropriate enforcement powers then being used to deal with the perpetrators. The next operation I can talk about in some detail, Operation Culture. This was targeting those that were causing antisocial behaviour, but particularly linked to people taking psychoactive substances. So as I'm sure you're aware, legal highs, when they first came into being, were a real issue at the East Coast. And actually some fantastic work undertaken across there to support the legislation that then came into being. There's wider issues within the town around urinating, for example, in the town centre, the taking of psychoactive substances and the associated antisocial behaviour and street drinking. And so police have worked with the council to secure a public space protection order, which brings with it some prohibitions in order to tackle that problem.
And is the legislation change from legal highs to psychoactive substances made a tangible difference?
Yes, absolutely. So while personal possession of psychoactive substances isn't an offence, dealing in them is, and what that's meant is that some of the head shops, the shops within the town that were selling legal highs quite openly, were forced to close. And actually we worked with the retailers prior to the implementation of the legislation to say this is what's coming, and we will take enforcement action, and that happened the day after the legislation came into place.
And so do you know, might be helpful you say, Lindsay, now you're not there, but do you see, is the impact that less people are doing it, or is it just, you know, gone underground or on the dark web, or these things going?
It's probably difficult for me to comment on it currently, but what I can say is that as a result of the head shops closing, the visibility of that, and certainly the reports we were getting of school-age children taking these substances, turning up at school with them, reduced significantly.
Great.
Very active Prevent Bronze Group operating across at the East Coast. So Prevent is one of the strands of the government's contest strategy in relation to counter-terrorism. A lot of work undertaken in relation to that agenda. I think Scarborough and Ryedale were the first command to ensure that workshops were delivered in secondary schools, training to professionals to enable them to identify people that might be at risk of radicalisation, but a really joined up approach across at the East Coast in relation to that particular strand of work.
Can you just explain, so what kind of extremism might be experienced over there? Because I think it's probably not necessarily what people would be used to on the news, is it?
No, so I know from my time across at Scarborough we had a couple of visits from the English Defence League, who've obviously got some very strong right-wing views, but Prevent is far broader than that in terms of people that might be vulnerable to radicalisation, and it's helping professionals identify some of those signs so that they're reporting those concerns through to police and security services to enable us to take action.
When I was over there, I can't quite remember when, there was sort of sporadic and random, so I don't think it was coordinating necessarily, but sort of far-right posters of different organisations going up, and sort of, you know, whether, you know, they're trying to garner support or not, but it, you know, it was still an ongoing problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
And is that, I know, I don't think it's on the slides later, there is a centralised team that helps coordinate some of that work, or helps deal with some of the Prevent strategy, or infrastructure type, you know, checking, making sure things are safe and protected, and the reviews are in place to allow, is that kind of called?
Are you talking about the infrastructure elements?
Yes, well, exactly. So there's the preventative measures for people who might be radicalised, and then there's the practical, how do we help keep people, buildings safe?
Yeah.
So, for example, we've just done a piece of work, in fact, Lindsay was present at City of York Council talking about their investment that they're going to be making shortly around some of the measures to protect the city centre, the racecourse and the Minster, for example. So we do work with partners actively on that.
That's what I meant, yeah. Great.
Yeah. And then I think finally, in relation to Scarborough, a nod to the really good work in relation to safeguarding that's been undertaken. So there's a rolling programme of safeguarding training which has been delivered to taxi drivers, to holiday parks, hotels and guest houses, as well as those working in the nighttime economy, so door staff, for example, around see something, say something. So that's again an educational programme to highlight that these are the particular things we'd like you to keep an eye out for. If you see anything that you think falls into one of these categories, please give us a call. And I can't go into some of the detail, but suffice to say we've already seen some really, really good results from that in terms of taxi drivers contacting us about some real specific concerns regarding child sexual exploitation, and similarly hotel bookings that have been made which are of concern.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, to be sort of slightly more clear with the public potentially, there's things like, and I don't know if this particular problem is one in Scarborough, but the pop-up brothel type issue where there's various sexual exploitation or human slavery in place.
Yeah.
It can be difficult to necessarily spot and track, but it is work that's being done
Yes,
in Scarborough.
absolutely.
More so than most places in North Yorkshire. You'll might be the other one, but Scarborough's more of a hotspot for that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where the importance of some of the control strategy priorities that I mentioned at the start of the meeting are relevant, because actually we have a whole stream of work at modern slavery and human trafficking, for example, which perhaps the public aren't always cited on, but we're working to try and counter some of those issues.
Yeah, and you know, there are, Scarborough, for example, has lots more HMOs than most places, and that brings with it issues. So there are various sort of social issues that are not unique to Scarborough, but much more focused in Scarborough than elsewhere in the patch, that sort of bring with it lots of other issues that make things harder to track or know where people are from and all those kinds of issues.
Which leads us really nicely onto the county lines issue.
Can I, just before that, so there are a couple of public type questions that you might be able to answer, Lindsay, given you're not in Scarborough anymore, but I'll ask them anyway. But one we've picked up just in sort of general conversations with the public, and when I was on patrol there not long ago actually, which is Whitby. Feeling, I think, again, that part of the coast feels out on a limb a bit anyway, often and a bit isolated, but some of the people I spoke to in rural Whitby, so not actually the town, but the sort of Morsey area, not far away, felt there was their evidence first I'm not so sure about, but lots of cross-border crime that they felt wasn't being as targeted as some of the work they see in Scarborough, for example, and they feel, I think, slightly less well understood and see less not necessarily visibility, action, but it's a little bit like drugs sometimes, where there is a lot of work going on, it can't always be seen by the public. But I just thought I'd feedback that northern part of the patch felt that things have got worse recently from organised criminals coming down from sort of Cleveland and Durham and that kind of area.
I'm probably not best placed to
No,
answer that
that's
in terms of the current issues. I know there's been a lot of work previously involving some of the wider support teams that Mr Anderson talked about earlier, such as the Rural Task Force, for example, and some of the specialist resources. But I've been out of Scarborough for probably about 8 months now.
Yeah. The two from the public should get it. You won't be able to answer, Lindsay, but I'll just flag them for sort of back of people's minds. One is parking and stuff in Scarborough Town, which you probably will know quite a lot about. I suspect that's probably a long-term issue, but in case it came up before, poaching we see quite a lot in rural areas anyway, but often, certainly in my mind through our office, is hare coursing or sort of mammal poaching, but there's a particular issue here about fish poaching apparently, but I know the task force have done quite a lot of work with the Angling Trust on those kinds of issues.
Yeah, and certainly I think specific questions have been put forward by a member of the public on this, and the inspector responsible for rural policing, the rural policing team, will be more than happy to get in touch just to try and understand that issue in a little bit more detail.
But
we have done an extraordinary amount of work
with
the rural community on wildlife crime and poaching.
The Chief Constable is the Police National Lead for Rural Affairs and Wildlife Crime. I know
Yes.
he's worked, him and his team have worked with the Angling Trust to start a sort of national project on that, because there are people up and down our riverbank all the time spending their time fishing that see lots of things and can help on the volunteer side of things, start to try and sort of improve that.
Just a couple of quick questions. So just in terms of Scarborough, so if members of the public perhaps don't feel confident about approaching the police necessarily, maybe because they feel that it will bring them a certain problems with their neighbours or anything, basically what we're saying that in Scarborough, if they mention it to their housing officer, to any of their local resources that they might come into contact with at all, they don't actually need to speak to the police about something, but it will feed back to the police hopefully through this referral mechanism.
And if we're talking about crime in particular, then Crime Stoppers is always an option as well in terms of contacting anonymously, and we would encourage people to do that too.
And obviously there's some fantastic work going on in Scarborough. Will's mentioned some the kind of more rural aspect to Scarborough District and obviously Rydale as well. And we know that there's some fantastic work going on in the north of the county, especially by the PCSOs up there. But in terms of Whitby and Filey and other areas of that command area, Presumably the neighbourhood policing teams are
They're
working
all
in a
linked
similar
into
way
the
then.
community impact team.
They're all
So while they
linked
may not be co-located in the same building, they'll still attend the weekly tasking meetings. There's 2 tasking meetings per week, one for the town, one for Outer, so Farley, Eastfield, Whitby. So yeah, they all have access to the same.
so that it all comes into that one central team.
Yes.
So nobody should feel that they're being left out just because we're
Mm.
talking about Scarborough
No.
town. Yeah, great.
I'd just like to reinforce, Tom, the point you made around members of the public who want to contact us through partners. That applies absolutely across the whole of North Yorkshire, because we all work in a very similar way everywhere. So if anyone has any concerns or fears, please contact us through any route.
And one of the other issues that comes up is drugs, which you're about to come on to,
Yeah.
but certainly there's that balance between dealing with the source and the organised crime groups that are supplying drugs, and it's almost a whole different kettle of fish dealing with people that are dealing it on streets and then using them. And I think sometimes it's hard for the public to know what the police are doing and not doing, and often feel like they're reporting things that action doesn't seem to be taken, and it's sometimes they've got balance. But Scarborough is a good example where the public were quite clear that they felt not enough was being done, and I think the sort of police efforts have stepped up a notch or two in the last couple of years. But I think you'll talk about some of that in a
Yeah, absolutely. So just to finish off in relation to Scarborough and Rydale, there's some success in relation to targeting county lines groups.
Can you say what county lines
I
is?
can. County lines is a method of organised criminality in relation to drug supply, and it consists of a number of essential components. So there must be a group that establishes a network between an urban hub and a county location, into which drugs, which are primarily heroin and crack cocaine, are supplied. They use a mobile phone line to establish within the market, so the county location is clearly Scarborough in this case, and orders are then placed and introduced, customers are introduced via that telephone line. The group typically exploit young people or vulnerable people to either deal on their behalf or store their drugs for them. So you see that there is a lot of cash movements, but there's also the securing the use of dwellings. So for example, we've seen examples where some of the criminals from outside of Scarborough will befriend a vulnerable person who lives in the town in order to access their property, from which they then go on and deal their drugs. Sometimes that's known as cuckooing, which refers to that vulnerable person actually being excluded from their home address, and again we've got examples of that in Scarborough where that's taken place.
And is county lines a growing problem because OCG's organised crime groups using it more, or have the police woken up to something that's probably been going on a little bit of time but wasn't necessarily visible for whatever reason?
I think there's an increasing propensity for people to be moving from urban into the more county areas, certainly over the course of the last few years. The slide that Lindsay will come on to talks about some of the successes, but we are continually working on this, not just at Scarborough, across the whole county. And this isn't a North Yorkshire specific issue.
No,
it's
No.
absolutely.
Can I ask? It might be an obvious question, but why are drugs gangs moving from urban areas to rural areas?
Genuinely just for the market demand, to increase their wealth and to circulate their products. And if you look at some of the national data and research, primarily Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham and London based gangs, they're all spread in a network, and very much I think it's very visible now, more so than potentially in years gone by. It's certainly an issue that's very visible in Harrogate, very visible in Scarborough and York. So the stuff that Lindsay's going to go through now is very much mirrored, particularly in those three urban, sort of the urban side of our rural areas.
Do you think, is there any element of it that is they see rural areas as an easier place to get away with stuff? So if they start basing themselves out of places that are traditionally less policed because there's less demand generally and less threat sometimes, that they go, well, if we sort of befriend someone in this small village, we may, and use that as a base, we may get away with it for longer because there's less police infrastructure, there's less police presence, there's less X, Y and Z.
I think that's probably a difficult one to answer, but I think if you look at some of the successes that we've had in Scarborough, we can prove that that's absolutely not the case. Some of the results that are shown on the slides there, we've got groups from West Yorkshire, West Midlands, Merseyside and South Yorkshire, all of which have either been arrested or convicted as a result of incidents that have happened in Scarborough. So I think it would be naive of them to think that.
We use a range of tactics to tackle this, but one of the key things and one of the key messages is we would encourage the public to come forward with information. either anonymously, as through some of the channels we've outlined there, or more formally, because, you know, lifeblood, information is the lifeblood of tackling some of these issues, frankly.
And I think just to finish, the final point in relation to county lines, which again is mirrored across, certainly across York and across Harrogate, is that the groups that are operating within our areas are inclined to use violence and make threats and regularly bring weapons into the community too.
And this is why it's a vulnerability issue, because
Yeah.
often some children might have no idea what they're about to get into, or they might think they do and they don't, and it's much more serious than that. And you know, suddenly they're in a sort of very different world than they thought they might enter.
And we do an incredible amount of work with North Yorkshire County Councils, the York Council education departments. You know, we have youth officers, PCSOs. We're doing work with the Youth Commission to get inside schools and other youth organisations to talk about issues. Crucial Crew, some of the other things that we do. You know, with the, you know, getting back to Fraser's point, really. You know, we do an awful lot of work to support young people, to prevent them becoming victims and to reduce the likelihood of becoming offenders.
And I suppose the other point to make is that we work across borders as well. So we work very closely with our colleagues in West Yorkshire, Manchester, Liverpool, London. We've ongoing tasking and actions and functionality, sharing information. So we work collectively outside the county as well to deal with this.
And without getting into detail, the organised crime groups that are listed on here, well, they're not the areas they're listed on. They'll probably be, those groups will be managed by other forces. So
Yeah.
if they're based out of West Yorkshire, they're probably managed by West Yorkshire. So you've got to engage with them to say, right, well, this is the impact they're having here.
Yeah.
We need some help in.
And we very much work together.
But the real focus here is on prevention in terms of, we've always found with drug cases that you take one drug dealer away from a reactive perspective and another one will step into their shoes. And I know some of the county lines work is about supply and demand. So there's an untapped market, or a market where somebody weaker than that gang is supplying that market, and therefore they see the opportunity to move in as we've said, and use violence to gain and take over that market. And we'll never tackle that if we just keep reacting to it. So I suppose the importance of local policing and the theme of this is the whole preventing people getting into that environment in the first place.
And I suppose if I'm right in summarising county lines by saying essentially brings a bigger drugs problem to North Yorkshire than might otherwise have been the case, because they are spreading to communities that might otherwise have been
Yes.
largely unaffected by drugs, to something that's more violent, more prevalent, more visible.
Yes. Or as a smaller problem that was tackled through a reactive response to arresting someone
Yeah.
and cutting the problem off. They've stepped into those markets, and because they have bigger networks, if you like, and there's a whole phone in a number, there's numerous people in the network, it's not about taking one household of drug dealers away from that environment, because you've got to then tackle the network, which is where our links with regional and national policing also comes in.
Thank you.
So that concludes Scarborough and Rydale. Are you happy for me to move on to York and Selby?
Yes, it's you again, isn't it?
It is. So again, I won't go through all the detail on that slide, but the top clearly outlines the police and crime plan priorities for York and Selby. There are some similarities to Scarborough and Rydale, but there are also some slightly different ones in there as well, which I'll talk you through as part of my presentation, if that's okay. So again, you've got a summary of the resources for the command, so Selby Response, York Response, the Serious Crime Team and the Investigation Hub. And then continuing the theme that we've already talked about in detail, just thought it might be helpful to give an overview of some of the work that's been ongoing within the York Hub and some of the recent successes that we've had from there. So as we've already talked through, the Community Safety Hub at York is multi-agency, staffed with police and council. They assess all reports of antisocial behaviour that come into either police or council on a daily basis, which is fantastic because it helps to prioritise some of the most vulnerable people really quickly, and also make sure that the highest risk cases are addressed in quick time too. The team manage all the high risk antisocial behaviour cases and the majority of the medium risk too, so it's the lower levels that go back out to the neighbourhood policing teams to manage. And those cases, a bit like Scarborough, managed through multi-agency case conferences.
Mm-hmm.
There's a clear focus on reducing antisocial behaviour, that was the focus.
That's what we're set up to do, that, wasn't it?
Absolutely, so slightly different to Scarborough when that was started. So examples of joint working currently are things like criminal behaviour orders, so powers that are available to the council. So the team working really closely with neighbourhood policing teams, making sure that we're effectively using the powers of all the agencies. And so we've recently had an issue of antisocial behaviour in the Chapelfields area, which I know has caused the public some real concern. And one of the multi-agency meetings focused on what are the powers and policies available to all the organisations that were on the table. And as a result of that, we sought a criminal behaviour order for one of the most prolific people within that group. And he's actually just been remanded in custody for breaching that order. So there are some fantastic powers that we're using jointly to try and tackle some of the issues.
Can you say a bit more, Lindsay, about, I think you're one of the few places where the chief delegated some powers, or has delegated some powers in the past to council officers, which you haven't necessarily done elsewhere, but because of the sort of nature of York, we've had some non-police staff sort of being able to do more practical stuff to deal with things sort of as and when they see them, or...
So I think you're talking about the community safety accreditation scheme, and my understanding is that those powers are withdrawn now from the council officers, because the feeling was that the ability to draw on each other within the team are kind of overtaken where we were with the CSAS powers. But the team also deploy out in the community, so again very similar to Scarborough. They worked collaboratively issuing community protection notices to tackle offending behaviour, and breach of the community protection notice is a criminal offence. So the team are really robust in the follow-up of any breaches, making sure that people are prosecuted through the court system if that's appropriate. And you'll have seen recently in the media, I'm sure, the joint success we had around the premises closure notice. So we had an address that was being used for drug dealing activity, again as a result of information that was supplied to us from the public, which was fantastic. We were able to support the council in an application to close that premise down, and that received some really positive media coverage. So some great up-to-date examples of where the team are working together. In Selby, the team is slightly smaller, as we've already seen from one of the previous slides, but again they're co-located within the district council. They focus on civil injunctions and criminal behaviour orders for some of the most prolific offenders, and again they see agencies referring to the team where cases are scored on the matrix, and the joint action plans are brought into being. They focus on victim offender location to make sure that they're targeting their efforts towards the most vulnerable within the society. So again, much smaller team, but again really effective ways of working that are coming through. For York, it's then split into York Inner and York Outer. So York Inner is predominantly the Micklegate and Guildhall ward, York Outer is everything else. And so there are a couple of key operations that I'd just like to touch on, if that's okay, in relation to some of the issues. So Operation Erase, that was brought into being to tackle some of the issues around people visiting York on a Saturday afternoon, drinking alcohol and causing antisocial behaviour. It runs from April and October, which is when we see the peak of the issues. And Operation Erase, behind that is again a multi-agency group of people who meet throughout the year to coordinate the activity to prevent and deal with ASB. Lots and lots of partners involved in that. So as you would expect, the neighbourhood policing teams, the licensing from both North Yorkshire Police and City of York Council, Safer York Partnership, which is the community safety partnership for York, ambulance service, York Rescue Boat and Make It York. Some of the ongoing work and the successes that we've had to date include a code of conduct which has been agreed with the licensees, regular licensee meetings and support given to them, so high visibility visits by police officers at some of the key times, which have been really, really well received. We have effectively tackled people who bring inappropriate inflatables into the city, which perhaps you wouldn't want to see if you're out with your family on a Saturday afternoon. But it's overall we've seen better partnership working between the agencies and the licensees themselves, which has been really welcomed. And that early identification of people or groups whose behaviour would co-work.
There's various projects in place on the sort of people travelling to York on the trains to sort of have a good night out and trying to deal with the level of intoxication on arrival.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of feedback, we've regularly sought feedback from the businesses and from the residents within the city centre who are most affected. As a police service, we've definitely seen a decrease in the letters of complaint regarding antisocial behaviour on a Saturday afternoon, but more broadly, Operation Safari, which is also on the slide, looks at the wider issues of antisocial behaviour and violence within the nighttime economy. So it raises specifically for those Saturday issues. Operation Safari is far broader around the nighttime economy, but again sitting behind that is a multi-agency group which coordinates and implements the activities, and therefore looking particularly at hen and stag weekends. People that come to York stay in typically the more budget hotels, for example. Look at the race meetings and how we coordinate activity through the city on those days, and also working really closely with the student population and the universities too, around some of the vulnerabilities in the nighttime economy there. There is a separate group that specifically looks at river safety, but that is something that's covered in the Safari meetings too. And again, the Safari team are looking at the slight rise that we've seen in violence within the city centre. So there's no hotspots that have been identified, but just generally that figure has increased. And again, that's a clear focus for the Safari group for the start of the year.
Is there a PS, public space protection order in York? Street drinking has been a sort of issue over the years, and we have PSPAs in various parts of North Yorkshire. I can't remember if there's one in York or not.
I don't believe there is.
Well, there are existing orders under the old legislation transferred across automatically or imminently to do so. So there are.
Does that effectively mean there are sort of versions of?
Yeah. So there are covering the majority of the city in terms of public drinking. They were called designated drinking orders or something like that, under old money. But I think the legislation has allowed for them to transfer across.
And they are, I should say, the local authority things, not police orders.
Yes, yeah. Just sorry to interrupt, but in terms of the nighttime economy, one of the things that we've been doing a lot of focus on prevention and intervention is working with our licensing team, working on applications and so on, so that we're able to put forward quite good arguments at hearings and so on in terms of, you know, the prevalence of licensed premises that from time to time
There was one turned down yesterday.
Yeah, there
Yes,
was,
there was.
So sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine. So again, and just covering off the licensing point, we'll continue to challenge the applications for some of the drinking establishments.
Just to sort of, again, sorry to interrupt, Lindsay, I think, certainly from my point of view, we've had less complaints about the York City Centre as well than our economy. So we had, a couple of years ago, a proportionate flood of people who were business owners who didn't want to, sort of afraid of locking up and getting back to their car and all sorts of things, that they have somewhat dried up actually, which is really good. So the work done over the years has helped. I think there's probably more to do, but it's been positive in that sense.
Brilliant, thank you. Operation Vestige then, just to touch on that one lastly for the city centre itself, that's a piece of work that's particularly addressing some of the vulnerability issues. So that's working with children, young people that have been identified as being at risk of child sexual exploitation or child criminal exploitation, and what the team will do there is follow up visits to those individuals and that early help prevention work with the families too around what support or intervention they might need. They also revisit anybody that's been missing from home and look at the wider problem solving opportunities around that, as well as any domestic violence follow-ups too for some of the low and medium risk cases. So Operation Vestige focuses predominantly on vulnerability. In relation to York Outer, the key operation...
Well, actually, York Outer on in Lindsay, but I think, I can't remember if you made a final decision or not, but on the deployment of PCSOs, I thought, are you thinking of changing some of the structures in York and that might change how people interact and see their PCSOs in the...
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the structures will change on the 9th of April, which will see some PCSOs that have been working as part of a centralised team actually go back out onto the areas. So I know some of our residents have expressed concerns, particularly in some of the outlying villages, that they don't know who their dedicated PCSO is, or that they haven't seen or been able to engage with that person. I think just to reaffirm our commitment to neighbourhood policing from the 9th of April.
So they might see a different sort of
Absolutely, and we're just looking at how we can publicise that too, to reassure people.
I'm sure that'll be music to some people's ears.
So for the York outer area, their focus at the moment is around Operation Casbia, which is an antisocial behaviour operation. It targets wherever the hotspot is at the time. So I know we've talked about Chapel Fields briefly already. Clearly some issues there towards the end of last year, antisocial behaviour, use of mopeds, whole host of issues there. Similarly for Sovereign Park too, which is also on the west side of the city. Complaints about large groups of youths gathering and generally causing some issues for residents within that estate. And I think that's included unruly and abusive behaviour, but also targeting of people's particular addresses too, which has been particularly unpleasant. And as I've said already, touching on the mopeds issue, people committing road traffic offences. And
Lots of it still involves roads in sort of York
yes.
Outer, it feels like, whether it's mopeds or some social driving or what, the boy racer type image of people, loud cars driving up and down.
Absolutely. So Casbia was brought into being, and that sees the deployment of the whole outer team into the particular area where the issue is to take some robust action around some of the individuals that are causing those issues. So that links back in nicely with the Community Safety Hub too. So once those individuals have been identified, it's looking at who, again, has the best placed powers to tackle some of those people or issues, and making sure that we're using the most effective use of those powers too. I was sent through some results earlier today because part of the team have looked at a SurveyMonkey survey for residents, particularly for Sovereign Park, where they were asked to rate their experience before the police action and after, and there's some real positives within that in terms of people feeling safer, people noticing the difference in the police presence, and generally saying that life now feels a lot better than it has done previously, so really positive.
It goes back to, as we always say with these things, for the public to report when they see, even those little things. Often we go to public meetings and there are various complaints about ASB or whatever else, and we ask who's reported it, and often they sort of look around thinking, well, someone else will have done it, because if it's a loud car, for example, and it's affected everybody, they'll assume someone's reported in, but isn't always the case. If you're deploying on hotspot type stuff, you need the public to sort of play their part and tell you where the problems are, so you can then respond accordingly, and if it works, then all the more reason to call and lock that issue.
Moving on to Selby then, just to give a summary in terms of the resources there. Obviously one inspector, this is for the safe and neighbourhood teams, 3 sergeants, 8 PCs and 20 PCSOs. I know Sherburn and Tadcaster have been a focus recently due to residents' concerns that crime was increasing in those areas. But I think to help reassure people, the resources at those stations are in place. And that's in addition to the response officers and the specialist resources that patrol those areas too. And I know we've touched on that, but I think it's really important to highlight that again, particularly for Sherburn and Tadcaster. Recent crimes that have received media coverage in those areas, we had the defibrillator which was pulled from the wall outside Costa Coffee, which again was very concerning for a number of people. The swimming pool window which was damaged during the burglary, which caused the pool to be shut for a long period of time, and some criminal damage to one of the signs on the high street. So without going into a lot of detail, there is someone on bail for the swimming pool incident, and staff from the Community Safety Hub at Selby, supported by the neighbourhood team, are looking at the wider group that we think are responsible for the antisocial behaviour and the criminal damage offences. So
it's hard to know whether it's reflective of anything in particular. It might have been the way we went about trying to get the public involved in this, but all the questions, which I know you've already seen, and we'll answer the public properly on each of these, but all come from Selby, none from York, and I suspect that reflects the proportion of sort of not complaints but feedback we get in our office that tends to be about Selby rather than York, and it seems to have sort of been growing, I would have thought, over the last few months. So just in the back of your mind, we get proportionally more about Selby than we would probably expect, and it seems to be increasing slightly, and they're all sort of different, so it's not particularly one thing, but sort of ASB type stuff and cross-border crime type stuff.
I think that's also reflected though in the crime stat maps that we'll be looking at later, that there seems to be a bit of a trend there.
Yeah, I'll ask that Selby seems to have got a bit of a long-term impact there, but so I'll cross that bridge on that particular slide, but just so you know, we get more feedback about Selby than we do most places at the moment.
no, that's helpful to know, thank you. The main operation that Selby have been focusing on is Operation Dusk, which targets cross-border criminality, but it's in response to a particular burglary trend prior to Christmas. I think there were 3 distinct trends within the Selby district between November and December of last year, and particularly high number of offences. I think 43 burglaries reported within a month, which is significantly high for that area. Operation Dusk created a real focus within that, and we also looked at how we could deploy our resources more effectively, so the use of a police staff investigator to focus as a burglary coordinator for the command. It's really helpful because he's actually a retired police officer who's always policed the Selby district, so he knows the area, he actually knows the majority of the offenders too. But he has helped in supporting the investigations enormously, and has also delivered that enhanced victim service too, by contacting each of the victims personally. So as a result of that approach, 5 people were arrested, I think, within the first week of that individual being in post and being able to coordinate some of the information that was coming into the office. And as a result of those arrests, which encompassed all 3 of the trends that we were experiencing, there has been a significant drop in burglary offences within the district. Of note, all of the offenders that were arrested actually lived outside of North Yorkshire. So again, I think we've covered the cross-border issues within the district.
And is the learning of that best practice from that, the way that worked, is that being applied? Because I know there are some other areas across the county where there have been spates like that. Is that being
It's certainly something that the Detective Chief Inspector for the command has shared with his colleagues across the force, absolutely. But in response to that particular problem and those really high numbers that we were seeing before Christmas, it's worked really, really well.
I don't know if it comes to commanders, Lindsay, or it's for the corporate comms team, but if our feedback into our office is reflective of sort of Selby more generally, and maybe people feel slightly less safe than they used to, or they see the impact of these kinds of things, do you work on trying to, aside from a headline of sort of locking some people up, to say, look, we've set up Operation Dusk, we are looking at really dealing with these people, we've got this person on it, used to be, do we go to the length that we might want to sort of try and reassure people that the police are trying to proactively tackle that stuff?
I think if I'm really honest, we do it to an extent that it's something that we could be better at. And it's certainly something that we're working with the neighbourhood teams and the serious crime teams to refresh. And I think finally, in terms of challenges and emerging issues for York predominantly it is the county lines style of drug supply, and I've been through that already in relation to Scarborough, but we're seeing some very, very similar issues with groups from Manchester and Liverpool targeting some of our real vulnerable people within the city. And the levels of violence and again use of weapons goes with those offences, so that's our area of focus.
Okay, thank you very much. Just check Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you'll be happy to hear, Paula, the other 20 or so questions are all about.
Fabulous. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I'm the district commander for county. I just need to clarify that county is actually made up of 4 distinct districts.
Yeah.
So you've got Hambleton, Richmond, Craven and Harrogate, each with their own local authority, district council, used in different areas, and each with their bespoke needs. Albeit interestingly, from the police and crime plan priorities, there's an awful lot of overlap and a lot of similarities in tone, albeit there's some bespoke issues, but generally I think I can deal with them as I go through in terms of community safety partnership plan and the ongoing work that's happening there. Again, I think it's really, my area is quite unique in so much as there's an awful lot of rurality, big massive swathes of fields, vulnerability because of the geography for people living in that community that I'm really very conscious of, and there's some nice little urban areas as well. So we've got Harrogate, City of Ripon, Northallerton, and a plethora of other sort of small villages and towns. So quite complex policing needs really. And whilst, if you move on to my magically button, the resourcing that I have, that I line manage specifically to me, I think it's important to comment here that actually across county there's lots and lots of other support from within the organisation. So I get significant support from the Rural Task Force, from our Specialist Ops resources, and the Roads Policing Group. Again, are the 3 main areas that work an awful lot of their time across my area.
I could have asked any of you this, but in terms of trying to get the support from those teams, so there's a finite number of those teams behind you that can come in and help. How do you decide between you who gets what? So
We
you go, well,
have-
I've got drugs from, well, I've got cancer. I've got
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mr. Anderson alluded earlier to our control strategy. And so we have a meeting that looks at the control strategy and what we call our force tasking priorities. So we genuinely have a conversation and see where the needs are best placed at that time to place the resources. So it's demand-led but also priority-led, a bit of a merge of those two.
And I presume it's not always a mutually exclusive. There might be a organised crime group travelling across the patch from one side to the other that's causing havoc all the way along. So actually you're dealing with the same thing by targeting the group over here.
And we work pretty well together as a team, I think, within North Yorkshire as well. And so there's the long-term planning, sort of 6 weekly, we look ahead and say our main priority for the next 6 weeks is that the ops resources may be in Scarborough, as have been recently because of the issues there. But actually every day there's also another meeting in the morning in case there's anything that's peaked overnight or within the last 24 hours that we need to be a little bit more reactive to and ebb and flow and flex as things come along.
Yep.
So in terms of my resources there, would it be helpful to say what each team actually does? I'm just not sure if people
It
be
would
conscious
actually,
of that.
and not. Yes, it would. Yeah, please.
Just conscious we've sort
Yeah,
of
of course.
brushed over it. So the response officers, the officers that you will get if you phone 999 or predominantly 101 for your 24/7 response.
So when we see flashing lights, they'll
Yes,
tend to be.
that's your response card. Cops, yes. The investigation hub is the majority of volume prisoners that come through. So I know it's difficult to categorise, but the prisoners that don't pose the same threat to perhaps vulnerability. So it's your antisocial behaviour, criminal damage, your lower level on enduring, quick turnaround type of prisoners that come in and out 24/7, and they're dealt with by our hub. And for me, my hub officers are based predominantly at Harrogate because that's where our custody suite is, albeit there's a number of them also based up here at Northallerton that deal with the inquiries and things up here. Oh, sorry, I should have said in terms of the response officers as well, for me, they're divided across the 4 districts. You have response cops responsible for Craven, Hambleton, Richmond and Harrogate. They're geographically based and they're currently in 16 different police stations for me, my response officers. So I'm constantly vying between being able to meet the demand, especially across the rural community, and making sure that my staff are properly supported, which is a bit of a challenge at times, but it's interesting to manage that and make sure that we can meet all the needs appropriately. Serious crime team, again, they sit within the criminal investigation department and they deal with the more higher level prisoners and the more higher level investigations. So that tends to be around rapes, crime, sexual exploitation, abuse of young people and children, and that sort of more serious crime. Yeah.
And they're based in Harrogate.
They're predominantly in Harrogate, albeit I also have a hub at Northallerton. And again, that's the challenge of the geography versus
And will-
demand.
Does the investigation follow the geography? So if someone's picked up in Richmond, taken to Harrogate, they then live, so they go back to Richmond. Will the Northallerton team tend to pick that up because of where the offender lives, or will it depend just entirely on sort of demand and who's available to take the case and that kind of thing?
Primarily that will be the case, but it'll depend on the investigation as well. So where the skills are. So we have different qualifications and different members of the teams that have different areas of specialism. So again, it depends where the skill set. But we do try and do that to minimise the impact in terms of travel and stuff. So just that'd be helpful.
Thank you.
You obviously better. So across county, as I said, we have the 4 different bespoke areas. Each one has their own community safety hub. Richmond, Shire, Hambleton, Harrogate and Craven, and they all have their challenges and emerging issues, but I just thought it would be helpful to touch on the commonality. Again, the ASB, each hub deals with ASB predominantly. Each hub has a weekly tasking meeting, and again, at the risk of echoing everything that you said, Lindsay, it's very similar structure to the Scarborough, York and Selby structure. Each team's made up of partners from the local authority, fire, health, education, and they all meet together weekly and discuss the issues and decide what's going to happen with what and who owns that and who owns the actions and who's responsible and accountable. In terms of then, I've just sort of go into some of the actual areas and what's happening there at the minute. Thought it might be interesting for people to know. So at Harrogate, we also have Harrogate Inner and an Outer. Harrogate Inner is predominantly the town centre of Harrogate, and that sits under one of our neighbourhood inspectors. And their key things at the moment are around an operation that's called Operation Culminate, and they've been really, really quite exciting to do because they're big days of action, so they're very visible, and it's around trying to reassure the public and bring the teams together. So multi-agency days of action where we're dealing with the issues that may be ASB, there may be people who need arrested or drugs operations, and they're quite fun for everybody involved, very visible, and the community have been really responsive to those, and I think people have enjoyed being part of it. So they've been good operations and very targeted on the current issues within the hub at the time. Operation Domain is more of an enduring operation that sits across Harrogate, albeit it's now been rolled out across the whole of the district and beyond, and that's in relation to, linked to the county lines work, but it's identifying young people who are particularly vulnerable. So they're being criminally exploited in relation to crime. We have quite a group of young people now that's expanded, that are being sucked into that, as you alluded to yourself.
Is it similar in manifestation to some of this sexual exploitation, where some young children won't know they're being exploited? They'll feel like they're...
It's a bit of kudos.
Yeah.
They think it's kind of cool to be the kid that's got a bit of extra cash, but they don't realise what they've been sucked into, very much so. Hence, very, very much working with education, with our youth workers, and across the schools. But also some enforcement as well, because it's again getting the right balance and the sort of proportionate response to the individuals involved in that.
And sorry, for when you get to that stage where you're sure, because we can talk about this for Colburn as well, I'm sure.
Yes.
But when you get to the stage where you have young people, because obviously trying to keep young people out of the criminal justice system to a large extent, just
Absolutely.
stop them getting into that spiral. We have the Youth Outcomes Panel now.
Yeah.
Do you find that that is working for you as a means of making these young people aware that they have done something wrong and that they are actually being punished for
Yeah.
it? Because some anecdotal feedback that we're getting is that the young people feel that they're not actually being punished for it, and can therefore get away with it, and
the public see that.
and the public see that, and
Yeah.
it's a big spiral. So, do you feel that that's working for you? Is there something that maybe we need to look at there? Do you think,
No,
or
I
is it
understand-
working?
I understand the frustrations of members of the public, and especially in relation to Coburn, and we can come on to that if you want to discuss it. However, for me, it's about being proportionate and appropriate at that stage in the criminal justice process. So I think for young people, we have to give them chances. We have to have those conversations. We have to engage the parents in the school and look at the full package. And think anything else would be unfair. Personally, I've seen young people being criminalised, and it has massive implications for their life chances, for their choices, and that itself can lead to further crime. So I think it's trying to get our community to understand why we're doing that, and whilst I get their frustrations, I think it's about education and getting everybody part of that solution, which is really what we're trying to do.
And so I guess that I completely agree with what you're saying there. Do you feel though that the youth cautions and those kind of things have the impact with the young people themselves?
It depends on the individual. Some young people and some families are just absolutely horrified. I mean, I had two young, it was up in Coburn actually recently, a number of parents in with the young people, and the parents were horrified and the young people were aghast. And as you know, we've set up the cadet scheme there and engaged with a number of young people. Some young people are not going to really be that bothered depending on their life scenario, so it's very difficult to without talking about individuals, to really go down that journey.
Yeah. And it used to be, there was a point in time where the police, I don't know if it was a national thing or a local thing, changed what things were called, so they weren't run a badge of honour anymore. So
The ASBO,
an ASBO
the
was seen as
ASBO
cool for a while,
badge.
wasn't it?
Yeah.
And suddenly, if you're a young vulnerable person, that's not quite so cool, you know. And there's some of those practical things to go about changing.
And I think as well it's around the partnership approach, because historically ASBOs were deemed for the police to police, and actually that's very ineffective. So we need to have wider partnership outcomes that involve everybody policing with a small p, including parents and family and community. And I think that's the way we'll get solutions.
As you might expect, Paula, some of the issues for your area tend to be, I know you'll come on to others, ASB or rural or parking, road safety stuff. So ASB certainly come out in public about totally at random, you know, in very specific places. But
okay, and I do know that all of the hubs, that is their primary chunk of business. And ASB is so wide reaching. There is some involving young people, there's some linked to mental health issues, and there's very complex reasons behind ASB. So it's trying to do the right prevention, the right intervention, and the right enforcement where that's appropriate as well.
And you see it's working on a future slide deck on the general monthly performance updates. ASB's been coming down for quite a long time now, so you'd have thought this approach which is bedded in now by and large you would have thought there'll be other things at play, but it is making a difference.
Yeah, and it's so unique to the experience of the victim.
Yeah.
You know, someone's ASB is someone else's fun,
Yeah.
so it's trying to understand the impact and
It's also-
make people aware of that.
Well, it would be saying it's coming down across North Yorkshire, but if you're experiencing it at home all
Absolutely.
the time, it's cold
Yeah.
comfort, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So just going back to Optimane, then the other thing that we've looked at there is around human trafficking, which is a very much an emerging issue. As part of not only does it in our control strategy, but we really didn't have the information and intelligence. So again, I welcome any observations that our community have to feed into that, and any intelligence they may have to help us strengthen our position on that. But it's very much an emerging trend, and we're getting more cases actually coming through linked to human trafficking.
is there anything we can point the public to look at? So is that often it's seen as a rural thing with sort of arable farms and
Yeah.
farm labour? Sometimes
Yeah.
it's car washes and other stuff. Is there anything the public could be looking out for in particular?
Do you know, it's very widespread. There's, at the risk of being stereotypical, there has been identified issues around a number of businesses, a number of rural things, but nail bars, car washes, anywhere where that sort of pattern of
Yeah.
external people coming
Yeah.
to work, and the community will know.
Yeah.
The community will know that actually these people don't normally live here. They're all here doing X, whatever that may be.
And call 101.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, or through a partner if they feel uncomfortable. Some people will feel uncomfortable. So yeah. And then the other thing that's really been interested in Harrogate we're working on is an element of the nighttime economy, predominantly the sex workers. And we've doing some really, really exciting work within our hotels, within the B&Bs, and within the general nighttime economy and the daytime economy increasingly around sex workers who are being exploited, and invariably vulnerable males and females that have been sucked into that world, so making sure that they're protected and that we're dealing with the criminal aspects of that as well. And I know that's mirrored in York. We've done quite a lot of joint work there as well.
Yeah.
Some students getting involved in that type of work,
Yeah.
and lots of other people with various vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and we funded things through the community fund, I think. On that
Yes,
front.
yes, you have. Yeah, so that's been good. So trying to visit locations, identify victims, and doing the preventative work and the education, and again the enforcement. In terms of then Harrogate Outer, we've had some quite challenging ASB in Boroughbridge, that we've done a lot of work with partners, and I'm pleased to see it seems to have receded, but you know, these things do ebb and flow, so I'm really conscious that again people need to keep telling us, and we're working very much with the partners around that.
We might catch up with you on CCTV in Boroughbridge as well afterwards.
Oh, okay, yeah, fine, that's fine, thank you.
And we did have a question about ASB in Ripon, which
Yes.
it's a perennial in our office. It's never long term, but we get spikes where for a
Yeah.
couple of months it'll crop up and then it'll die
Yeah.
down, crop up,
Yeah.
die down. But ASB in Ripon seems to be sort of challenging to fix in the longer term, and so I don't know if that's about what's available for young people to do. I don't know what the sort of causal
Okay.
effects are, but it does crop up occasionally.
Okay, and again that links into some of the place-based stuff that I know particularly in Harrogate we're trying to focus on across the whole of the district, and how we can progress that, so that type of place is a good place
Yeah,
to start.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So then in terms of just moving down then to Hambleton, in Hambleton a really great piece of work that we see in Hambleton and Richmond, less so in Craven, but we're working on it in Craven, is around our Border Watch. So we currently have 250 volunteers, which is just phenomenal, the support we get from the community. It's been absolutely outstanding. And just to explain, that's the number of people who go out in mobile patrol, who work with our officers, who generate intelligence, who work across a whole range of initiatives within their communities to really support us and to challenge and tackle crime on those rural areas.
And she won't want singling out, but Sue
Yeah.
it gets a particular hat tip for all the work she does.
Yeah, she's very good, very supportive. That's our stuff at the community.
But it did come up, Julia did mention actually, had she been here, that Craven seems rather sort of more sparse compared to some of the
Yes.
other patches in that regard, and whether there's any particular work that needs doing in that
Yeah.
part of the border area to sort of try and extend that scheme a bit more and get a bit of momentum
Yes.
behind it.
And that's very conscious of that, and this piece of work that's ongoing. In fact, I met with Natasha yesterday, who's
Good.
our lead for Citizen Police, and
Yeah.
she's working with me on the Craven area, as Jeff Crocker, the inspector up there as well, to fill that void. Because it's just, and again in the cross-border criminality, it's so helpful and insightful as well. Moving on across to Richmond, then Coburn. Tom, I know you've already mentioned to Coburn and social behaviour there. There's been some fantastic work there, and it's frustrating, I suppose, and very challenging, and I feel for the community there. We have done some incredible work. We set up the cadet scheme there, and I think the cadets have been fantastic piece of work. And I think it's of note that the volunteers who support the cadets are actually police officers and police staff, but they do it in their own time, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
That they invest back into the area that they work in as well in their own time. And the young people there, again, they've been outstanding. And we're trying very hard with the community of Coburn to make a difference there. And again, to be proportionate and to work in partnership and to try and find a long-term enduring solution. There's something around the architecture, design and out crime that we're looking into as well because of some of the physical issues there.
Have you seen, I know large parts of the Colburn issue, it might not be appropriate, but is there a way for the cadets to somehow be part of the solution in a sort of practical sense? So I was just at the passing out in York and it's really good, and there's things planned, but they're really keen to sort of meet other young people and try and resolve stuff where it's appropriate and it's possible. But
well, the meeting we had yesterday was around that very issue, and we were discussing how the cadets could support events in that area. For example, the Easter holidays could be upon us to try and have some diversion events that young people actually want to go to.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes we put on events that might be a bit stale and a bit dull for young people.
Yeah.
To try and find something that actually they want to. Yeah, coffee mornings. But something that's fun. So that's what we're tapping into the cadets to support us with.
With the response to ASB, obviously, if you have a row of shops and there's young people or whoever outside causing a nuisance or being antisocial, there may be a tendency to say, well, it's happening to everybody here.
Yeah.
If there are particular shops there that are maybe being managed by different communities and they feel that they are maybe being targeted in a slightly different way, I presume there would be a different response to that and an acceptance that there may be different issues there and more serious issues in terms of hate crime.
Yeah, and it's around how the victim feels and the impact it's having on the victims.
Right.
So if there's any element of hate crime, I think I know what you're alluding to, then that is very much treated as a different type of crime, offence and a different response, because the impact of that is so much more significant on the individuals involved as opposed to general low-level ASB.
Okay, and
so
so
it's felt very differently.
Those individuals should continue to report when they feel that that is the case and be firm with officers that is how they want to report it.
Yes. And if there's any issues, again, that there are processes in place. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, especially in hate crime. Absolutely. And Paul, I'm conscious of time, and we need to be fair to all parts of York County Command. So I don't want to shortchange Craven and Ambleton and Richmondshire, but we're going to run over anyway. But if you could bear time in mind.
Okay, no, that's fine.
I'd let Lindsay talk too long, probably.
Thank you, Lindsay. So again, Craven it's a rural crime. A bit of a spike around border crime and burglaries recently. We've done an awful lot of work. Again, massive thank you to the Rural Task Force who've been incredibly helpful in their time and resource. And there's actually been a significant reduction again in burglaries in the Craven area. That's been a big investment across the force and linking into West Yorkshire. We do a number of joint cross-border operations with our colleagues in West Yorkshire up there in Keighley, Bradford at the top end. And again, it's something that it's very difficult to eradicate because people come across the border and you move from quite a high density Bradford, Keighley to come across into our rural area. It's quite tempting, I think, for some of our criminals.
Two things on Craven. One, I don't ask where this information comes from and how accurate it is, but I understand there's 100% more quad bike thefts this year than last year, or a period of time compared to another period of time. So burglaries mapped down, but there are other things being nicked. From the local team there, and this is sort of third hand, so again, I'm sure it'll be on your radar, I'm sure, but the impact of county lines type drug work in places like Skipton, I think, and all the other probably county towns where, to a certain extent, if you live in somewhere urban, you're probably used to it to a certain extent to maybe see more visible use of drugs, but I think the impact of they might not even notice county lines drugs, but they can see a slightly different feel, I think, to some of the type of crime that's going on in that part of the world. That's like, thankfully, like lots of North Yorkshire used to low levels of crime and certainly not serious or violent necessarily, but it seems to be changing a little bit, I think.
Okay. I'm very conscious of the quad bike issue, and we're doing a number of operations, a number of various tactics being deployed across Craven to tackle that at the moment. And in fact, we had 3 West Yorkshire nominals arrested early hours of this morning.
Good.
For the theft of a quad bike.
Good.
Caught in action, so that's helpful. But that is ongoing piece of work. I wasn't really cited on the community sort of tension impact that you're suggesting there around drugs. That's really helpful. If you can help me with that, I'd appreciate that. The other issue that I was going to touch on was just around the general thanks to the public, because the responses are fantastic in the rural areas and we get tremendous support.
Right.
Is there anything else you want me to pick up on?
I
from
don't
your
think so.
questions?
We just don't. We're not able to answer all these questions, but there's, as you'd imagine, a decent number of the questions we've had about rural crime in particular. So trail hunting and op owl.
Yes.
I think there's a mixed opinion. Well, that's not fair. We had one person say they didn't like the way they felt the police were trying to target rural workers with being persecuting raptors and all the rest. I'm sure that wasn't how it was gone about actually, but it was a perception issue. So nothing you wouldn't expect, Paul, I don't think, and I won't go into them all in detail. We'll get, I'm sure they're answered at the end, but pockets of ASB and lots of wildlife related rural crime.
And just on the kind of wildlife side of things, I had a bit of interesting feedback the other day that gamekeepers who feel that they are trying to be helpful and are actually feeling a little targeted by the fact that they're still getting all the literature and everything about not doing what they're So there might be a balance to find in actually working with them and
it's really difficult, isn't it?
It is a very difficult balance.
But I know
it might be.
I assume
something which popped into my head.
I assume
I think because it's blanket, isn't it? And I think they're just feeling, well, yes, we've actually been working with the police and we're still getting this kind of.
I think I'll know the cop who did op owl, but I think you might have partly answered this question already in the written answer. The public wouldn't have it yet, but there were a number of gamekeepers as part of the operation, sort of supporting all the work. So it's not, it's just difficult, isn't it, to get that right balance. And I don't think it'll please all the people all the time. So in that sense, it's not.
Well, it's similar to the hunt issue that was raised. I mean, we've 17 registered hunts, and we do engage very much with the people involved. And there's a number of investigations ongoing in relation to hunts, so just to reassure the public that we are very much cited on that issue. And again, welcome any intelligence or information to support any prosecutions where there's inappropriate.
And I presume the kind of response to that would be to say to those gamekeepers to get in touch and be proactive about coming forwards and engaging.
And I mean, you mentioned hair coursing right at the very start. I mean, that's a real concern because again, it's a lot associated organised crime. Hair coursing, linked to firearms and various criminality, illegal gambling and stuff. So again, any intelligence would be very welcome.
Well, it's probably worth going by the chief because it was via his NPCC lead that this got picked up. But we had a National Rural Crime Network meeting last week, and Craig Naylor, the deputy in Lincolnshire, do loads of work on hair coursing. They've got an analyst just on hair coursing, and they've uncovered a whole load of stuff. By looking at it in sort of forensically for the first time in a long time, they've got all sorts of interesting learning from that. So if you're not already in touch with Lincolnshire, go and do that. You'd find it was on. In fact, they did a inside out the other day.
Yeah, that's right. And then the other thing, just to touch on really briefly, conscious of time, is our road safety.
Yes, great.
Massive concern for our community and certainly for my area's community. I know I get regular dialogue and conversations. There's a number of people who have raised concerns around speeding that they perceive in their areas. So I really would just ask them to fill in the speed concern form. I know perhaps it's not the answer people want to hear, but actually if they don't highlight us through the proper way, it limits our ability to deal with it. So the speed concern form that you fill on the North Yorkshire Police website is really helpful. It highlights the issue and then we can have the appropriate response. We can do the surveys, gather the data, and either go down the route perhaps of Community Speed Watch or else our camera safety bells. I think that's just generic, really helpful.
Our officers are very happy to talk people through that, and it can feel slightly bureaucratic, less so than it used to, but it does end up in the right solution after a sort of few weeks, and it is worth doing. I agree with you. So.
And Community Speed Watch, again, the community would be fantastic with that. Growing number in many areas, and the data that we have today, albeit it's limited and it's difficult to fully assess, but certainly a suggestion that there is a reduction in speeding in related incidents.
And we're trying to increase the speed in which communities get Community Speed Watch. At the moment, you got it at the end of the process. I think they're reviewing to see whether you can have it in the middle. Effectively, once we've gone, do you know what, most likely that's somewhere that's safe to have it. So it is worth doing, and we are trying to improve that.
So it's helpful to say that.
Thank you, Paul. I'm sorry for sort of
that's fine. That's fine.
Thank
you. That's fine.
And members of the public, Rich is going to finish off this set of slides, but we will answer all of your questions in writing as soon as we can.
Yes, I will finish off the presentation. I'm just conscious of time. How do you want me to play
I don't mind running a little bit over. We don't cut off at 1:30.
Okay.
There might be some people who will have to stop what they're doing, watching us at 1:30. So obviously I don't want to go too over. But part of the reason we want to talk about local policing is so the public also understand all the other elements that are available to commanders to deal with things. So I don't want to skip over this too much because it's important to explain the full resources that the police have at their disposal. So bear in mind time, but also don't sort of give it too short a shrift because it is important.
I guess maybe at this point it'd be worth saying, just in case anybody does have to drop off from watching, that we are intending to run a more comprehensive survey around neighbourhood policing in the near future. We had to postpone it temporarily, but that will be happening, so there will be a further opportunity to contribute feelings and thoughts about neighbourhood policing in the near future. Keep an eye on our website for more information. Thank you.
Right, okay, so this last section then of the presentation concerns some of the other supporting functions and some of the other stuff we've been doing to support local policing. I'm not going to go too heavily into this one because I've just noticed that the next theme next month for discussion is digital policing.
Yes. And this doesn't do it justice because mobile working is really brilliant and exciting and game changing, and that doesn't look like it.
Well, no. Safe to say is we've started rolling out mobile technologies, so the public will increasingly see officers more visibly on the streets rather than back to service. So we're up to a point currently of about 500 devices rolled out. You get a more fuller update next month. Okay.
Sorry, actually, just sorry to come off that. Could you just give a quick word about the impact that might have in terms of police stations and because obviously the point of that is that officers will actually spend time out in communities, isn't it? So they might not necessarily be in a police station. Yeah. Can you just say something about how, if they knock on the door of a police station, how they might actually need to communicate instead?
So previously, the model of working was an officer would go to an incident, do some work with the victim or the offender or whatever, and then very often go back to the police station to do the paperwork, and therefore they weren't visible in the street, on the street rather. Now, the technology we're rolling out are tablet-based devices, similar to the one the Deputy Chief Constable was using here, so that officers can update the incident logs whilst they're out on patrol. They can take statements off a member of the public whilst sat with them on the device and so on, and then increasingly over the course of the next year we will roll out further systems on the devices that reduce the need for officers to return to police stations, so to fill out, for example, forms relating to whatever issue, domestic abuse, missing from homes. They can still fill those ones out in a paper format currently on the street, but they then have to go back to the police station to send them off to the next process. So the direction of travel will be one of seeing more officers on the streets in vehicles and so on and so forth for patrol, because we'll also be rolling out little handheld devices like mobile phones as well, because obviously some of these are a little bit too cumbersome to be doing foot patrol work with. These will be used for form filling and so on and so forth, but increasingly officers will have mobile devices that they can do quick forms on and things, akin to a pocketbook essentially. Okay, so but you'll get a more fuller update on that next time.
Thank you.
Okay. The next slide. Well, we've talked an awful lot already about rural policing, haven't we? So this slide talks about our rural task force. Okay, so a fine bunch of people there, comprising police officers, police community support officers, led by an inspector, and then with 2 sergeants as part of the team. They are the largest rural team in the UK, as it says on the slide there, and then the little structure chart underneath there just emphasises what I've outlined already. That's been set up now since 2016. They launched, for example, quite recently the operation we've spoken about, Operation OWL. They do 2 things essentially. They do enforcement activity around rural crime, issues such as quad bikes and so on and so forth, rural crime, wildlife crimes, but they also do, and predominantly the PCSOs who are attached to the team, do an awful lot of engagement work with the rural communities.
9,000 odd farms they're visiting.
There are, yes, a tremendous amount of farms.
There's a lot of farms.
And prevention work.
Yeah, of course, the only thing I would say, Richard, not for now, I'll pick it up with the relevant person outside the meeting, but I still think this team have opened a can of worms in the sense I think the organised crime element is bigger than certainly I would have thought it was, and I also worry it's at a level below ROCU level, so it's lots of lower level organised crime, don't worry, that doesn't necessarily get picked up by all the very good and well run back office type investigation things that are harder to therefore to fully understand, deal with, log, all those things. So it's not for now.
Yeah, and I think it links in with border crime as well.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Border,
Yeah.
a lot of forces where we get travelling criminality coming in.
And so they're sort of tactically dealing with everything that's thrown
Yeah.
at them. They're doing a brilliant job. I just wonder if there's a sum of its parts problem here that we're not quite fully, not just North Yorkshire, I mean sort of across rural policing generally, that there is an organised crime element that still isn't fully understood because it's sort of dealt with in a different way when it manifests in drugs or firearms or other things, and the acquisitive nature of it isn't always picked up.
So the next slide is also regarding our rural task force, and that just shows how we work in partnership with some of the surrounding forces. Touched on that already.
Yeah, we did task force not long ago either, so this should hopefully, all this is online for the public who wants to see
Oh, right, okay.
a fuller
Yeah.
Yeah.
task force update. The Inspector Grange was in not long ago, so
And Paul's already mentioned the volunteers we've got, which are increasing, you know, in terms of rural watch and so on. So I want to lid on that one.
Yeah, there's something that we haven't really touched on actually is the neighbourhood watch schemes that run across the county. I know there's been a bit of difficulty, not with them, but they are having a bit of difficulty at the moment recruiting and so on. Is there anything in particular that
I mean, Natasha's doing a force-wide piece of work
right?
on the whole refresh of Neighbourhood Watch. I mean, just for the public, it's a national organisation that works in partnership with the police. I think it's often misunderstood that the police run Neighbourhood Watch, and they don't. We work collectively in partnership with them. And it's also, there's generally an older generation that are used to being involved with Neighbourhood Watch, and Natasha is trying very hard to say, actually, there's a whole breadth of community out there who could get involved in Neighbourhood Watch, and I know there are some bespoke schemes nationally, so people who are helping with dementia-specific Neighbourhood Watch schemes, for example, that can help people look out for people who've gone missing. So there's lots of bespoke bits of work that can be done rather than your generic, people's general understanding of what Neighbourhood Watch was traditionally about. I mean, Richard will have worked more closely with Natasha on it, but there's certainly a whole piece of work going on to refresh the Neighbourhood Watch.
I've spoken to Natasha a couple of times last week because it's sort of scheme in North Yorkshire does need a bit of sort of TLC, I think, but one of the reasons for that is there is a change in Neighbourhood Watch nationally.
Yep.
They are effectively rebranding and moving away from a sort of from the model they did employ to more of a sort of proactive sort of community social action one. So the whole thing is in flux really. It's not a North Yorkshire thing, it's a national thing. It's manifesting in local areas, I think. So it is complicated, but Natasha and the members are on it, and I think it's just about sort of finding the right solution in a short time.
Okay. The next thing I want to touch on briefly is automatic number plate recognition. Because we've already talked about border crime, organised crime groups and so on. North Yorkshire is the largest single county police force in England, 6,000 miles of roads and borders, 7 other counties including 4 with the highest crime rate per 1,000 population. So, the importance of automatic number plate recognition systems they are placed strategically around the county, around the borders, around the towns and so on. We have invested quite heavily in this technology recently. We have an automatic number plate recognition hub based in our force control room that work hand in glove with the force control room. Without disclosing tactics, that's based on intelligence. So we get intelligence packages generated. Officers are then deployed based on automatic number plate recognition reads to intercept vehicles, very often as part of a proactive operation. For example, one is example here, cross-border crime report from Lancashire Police of a stolen tipper with a GPS tracker. The hub contacted the victim, the tracker details obtained, ANPR was used, resources were deployed, including the fire support unit, which I'll come on to shortly, stopped the vehicle. The vehicle was in convoy with other vehicles, a tipper, and more vehicles. All 3 vehicles were recovered and offenders arrested. So, and I've got a number of examples, but given the time constraints, I won't go into all of those. I think the next, again, and this is just talking about the broader support from the force to the commands, the Operations Support Unit. North Yorkshire Operations Support Unit is made of 4 teams. Each team is made up of 12 constables and a sergeant.
And these don't count in the numbers we've seen.
No.
These are in addition to. Yeah, so you've already had 3 numbers for each command. You've already had the neighbourhood policing numbers. These are additional numbers. So headed by a sergeant, 12 constables per team, formerly of the neighbourhood support teams and the roads crime team, now combined with a multitude of skills. And again, I'm not going to read through all the points on there, but that just gives you a feel for the sorts of things that the teams support the broader force in.
And do they do planned and responsive stuff? So, you know, if there is a job that comes in that no one knew was going to come in, they get deployed as much as responsive as everybody else.
Yeah, they will. So we've talked already about our tasking process, so they will be proactively tasked to deal with certain issues as they arise, but also will react as well.
This includes unmarked and marked, so you won't always know that these teams are sort of roving around the county, but they are. You just might, they're not in their marked.
Yeah, they're highly flexible. They have a broad range of uniform tactics that they can use. So, for example, they use the AMPR technology in their vehicles and so on and so forth.
So they might get deployed after an AMPR hit if it's the right one.
Yeah. Equally, they'll get involved in searching, house searches, searching for missing people, but in plain clothes, they'll undertake plain clothes operations as well, depending on the tactics that we need.
Multi-skilled.
Yes, and highly trained. The Organised Crime Unit, North Yorkshire Police has an Organised Crime Unit. So we've talked already about investigation hubs, dealing with low-level crime, we've talked about serious crime teams. Our Organised Crime Unit deals with a high level of organised crime that might cut across a number of borders, a number of districts. We've talked about county lines, the Organised Crime Unit, support the commands on the organised crime on the county lines. Dedicated team of detectives. Again, I'm not going to read from the slide there. There's a couple of good examples on the slide.
Yeah, and there's a good example of the plane that flew to one of our many airfields. How many? There's a lot of airfields.
There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot.
70 or something like that. That could be totally wrong,
There's
but
a
a
lot.
lot. And that's £5 million worth of drugs in the back of an aeroplane.
Mm.
You know, one of those many airfields. So, North Yorkshire is not immune to some of these really big groups trying to use whatever means they can to get.
And I think that's an important point to make, because there are significant crimes that the team deal with that are complex as well and take an awful lot of behind the scenes work, both pre and post arrest, but take out a lot of risk out of our communities. The next slide talks about our Firearms Support Unit. The multi-skilled Firearms Support Unit is a high-performing team, plays a vital role in diverse challenges that face modern policing. They work alongside a number of other specialist units, both within the force but also extending into surrounding forces, because we're part of a broader YATH arrangements, Yorkshire and the Humber arrangements. This means that North, West and South Yorkshire Police, along with Humberside, are one large interoperable resource. Joint training, equipment and vehicles are all the same. Therefore, we're able to work alongside our colleagues anywhere in the region seamlessly. And these officers are deployed 24/7 in North Yorkshire.
And thankfully, they're not needed all that often in our particular part of the world, which is great. What the public often asks, what do they do? The 95% of the time they're not needed with their firearms. What do they do?
Yeah, so I've talked about the broader tasking process, so similar to the support units and the other units I've outlined there. We will focus on some of the force priorities.
They will undertake policing duties. That's just So very often, members of the public might see them patrolling across in Scarborough to support local policing there, but in a non-armed capacity. And you wouldn't actually. You might think they're part of a response team in Scarborough rather than a firearms team.
Yeah.
So these are.
Or indeed, York or anywhere around the county. They particularly support some of the rural areas as well, as Paul has outlined. In her districts. I think we've touched quite heavily on roads policing, and I think this has been something from a previous presentation, I might be wrong, 95 Alive and so on.
Roads.
We did road safety.
We did road safety.
Road safety. So road policing group, North Yorkshire, we have lots of roads. Our job is to police these routes and ensure road user safety. To do this, we implement various operations and work alongside local communities and our partners, such as the 95 Alive partnership. The 95 Alive partners are outlined there on the thing. The relevance for local policing, I think we've touched on already. The broad range of work we do around community speed watch, safety camera vans, and a whole host of other.
I'd just at this point mention Operation Spartan, which is still ongoing, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
And certainly in the last chapter proving very popular and welcomed by the public. It's still on to, if those people with dash cams and that kind of
Yeah.
Yep.
equipment, there is a really easy way to now report that to the police if you've seen or recorded something you think needs reporting.
Yeah.
Or if not, you can still report it, but it is a way to upload those images that people often have, bike helmets or whatever. So search for Operation Spartan, you'll be able to do that.
And Inspector Barth and his team actively do look at those and undertake follow-up action on those reports.
And is this the same team that will look at, we still have lots of serious crashes on our roads that require investigation until, something wasn't, someone either wasn't killed or it wasn't on purpose or whatever it might be. Did that team do these investigations or was that done separately?
So we have a number of specialised teams. So if there's a serious or fatal road traffic collision, then we deploy our major incident collision investigation team, who will do a Rolls-Royce investigation into that.
Are they within that are they a subset of that
Yes,
team?
they are. Yeah. Okay. The next slide is regarding our dog section. So North Yorkshire Police is part of a 3-force collaboration programme called Evolve. So that's ourselves, Cleveland and Boom. Through Evolve, 2 constable commissioners decided to combine the dog units across all 3 forces to create a single integrated dog section. Training and tactics are the same across the whole region. For immediate incidents, we now operate on the rule of the nearest dog goes. So people could see a dog officer from another force deploying in North Yorkshire, for example. I mean, in terms of what the public will see is they will still see dog officers supporting local police in North Yorkshire.
And this is quite a complex question that's only got 10 seconds in which to answer it, but this was one of the first things we collaborated on and it had some teething problems, I think it's probably fair to say. Is this joint unit more bedded in now and still, I think there's the odd sort of hiccup, but I think
There's a huge amount. So as an Evolve board, we meet on a regular basis so that we can tackle both at a strategic and a more tactical level some of the issues. There's going to be a peer review of the implementation of that team so that 1, we can learn the lessons from it, and 2, there's an independent body coming in to actually assess, because it's difficult. Obviously each of the forces have got a vested interest in that team, and therefore an independent force are going to come in and do a peer review so that we can iron out and learn the lessons from some of those.
But was that on the implementation lead or also on the activity sort of hereafter?
I think the scope of the review is implementation and how it's actually working in terms of the business benefits that have come out of it.
Great.
So, I think we've dealt with questions as we've gone along. What I've tried to do is give you a feel for what's going on in each of the districts, so thank you, and then outline the broader approach of the process to support local policing.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate everyone's time and effort in putting all that together and delivering it. And hopefully it's certainly given me a very helpful sort of steer as to how it all works and how you work together. And hopefully we've probably got a good idea as to what the priorities are and how you go about trying to resolve those and work with partners and all that stuff. And then everything that's behind that for when you need it. So when something does happen, you've got a whole group of people who are sort of swarm in and help police it. So thank you very much. Anybody else got any questions on the back of the bag? We'll move on to the next agenda item then, please. Which is, if I find my agenda, Kingfisher. Kirby Misfits an update, please. I think that's you, Richard.
Okay, so this is a standing agenda item at these meetings. So I'm not going to go into all the points, but the aims of and the overview of Operation Kingfisher are out there. And obviously this is in relation to the policing response at Kirby Misbeton. I suppose the thing I just want to focus on there is the last paragraph on the next slide, which is on many days in January of 2018, the only officers present at the site were a few police liaison officers whose role is to engage with the protest community. They were also redeployed back to their areas when there was no protest activity. So one of the next slides just shows the amount of resources to be put in there. But essentially, we have a full command structure running Operation Kingfisher, and we resource to need and to demand. So if the demand's not there, we don't automatically throw a whole host of police resources at it.
So we had two questions on that, Richard, which I won't read out in full. One was essentially about is it being over-resourced?
Yeah.
And I think that partly that last paragraph helps to answer that by saying if there's no need for loads of officers to be there, there won't be.
Correct.
And they
It has to
support
be.
local policing, I think, more importantly, as opposed to them going off and doing something at force level. They are deployed back to local areas.
And that's the other thing. So in answer to one of the questions from the public is you've got the operational management of the peaceful protest there, but you've also got someone who's overseeing the impact on the rest of the business and business as usual policing effectively to make sure that impact isn't as impactful as would.
Yeah, so the gold and silver commanders on each day will look at the resources that are required and as soon as possible release officers back to local policing to support.
The other question on Cody and Misperton was probably more for Julie, which is about the has Kingfisher had any impact on the setting of the preceptor, which it hasn't. There's an operational reserve for funding policing issues like this, and also we still very much hope to get money back from the Home Office as and when we make that application, depending on how the rest of the policing goes.
And the last slide on Kevin Misperton talks about some of the costs, which are outlined there month on month. So January. 48,101. The table below shows the additional costs related to the policing operation. This includes overtime, equipment, subsistence, travel-related costs. These costs do not include the cost of those officers that are assigned to policing the site on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can see by tracking through that when there is lots of activity, October, November, the police presence is higher, but as and when required, you can see it's much less than that.
And the bang up-to-date update, I suppose, is that yesterday the drilling rig was removed from the site.
Right.
Okay. There was a policing response put in there for that particular phase of the operation, and again we'll continue to provide a policing response as long as these are required.
Of course.
Which will be proportional.
Thank you. I think that's that for that, unless anyone around the table's got any questions. Cross off agenda item 5 then. Agenda item 6 is our monthly performance update. I'm not sure who's taking that. We'll try and whiz through it again. I do have a couple of questions.
That'll be me again.
Yeah.
So I can start you off. I can go through it, or are there any areas you want to focus on?
I'll just skip the questions. One is, it's interesting really, given what Paula and Lindsay have said, on the tactical response, a large proportion seems to be about drugs, which is great, and I'm just wondering if we feel like the drugs threat has increased and whether that's just down to county line stuff. Well, it might not have done, first of all, so is that feel accurate, and is that largely a county lines thing that's just impacting on North Yorkshire more as we understand it more and see the sort of progression of it, or is there something else?
Yeah, I think the straight answer is we are seeing an increase in the county lines type incidents within North Yorkshire and the City of York. I think each of the commanders has touched on that, and Alistair, if he was here, would talk about it in terms of Scarborough also. So yes, through our tasking process and all the things I've spoken about already, we're doing a lot of work around that.
Yeah.
I know you can tell, and it's sort of good to see partly why I wanted to ask the question, but we were talking about it outside. Often the public report drugs problems and don't always see a response because it's not something that's visible, because there'll be lots of work behind the scenes and covert and all those tactical things that police officers do. So reading this does give the public a flavour as to some of the things in place to try and deal with it, even if it might not be visible per se, but carry on reporting things in the meantime if
Yes, absolutely.
be it on the sort of dealing logistical type stuff or the taking and the paraphernalia that might be left behind as well. Thank you. My other main question, Lindsay, is probably one for you, which we've talked about this before, part of you as well, Paul, actually, but it was more so Leicestershire, Richmondshire, but Harrogate and Selby seem to have had fairly consistent increases in crime over the years now. So they've been on our performance sheet as red. I know we only, that's sort of very basic quantitative information, but whether there was any particular reason why those two districts in particular seem to be always red and the others don't, and whether there was something structural that needs to be looked at. So does there need to be more NPI in Selby or anything like that? They've totally made up the solutions, but do you know what I mean? Is there something more structural that needs to be looked at, or is it a circumstantial thing that you'll continue to look at? It just seemed more long term than maybe we'd given it credit for before.
I think in relation to Selby, I'm obviously relatively new to role, but I have asked the question of the inspector for the district who attributes the majority of the recent rise to the burglary spate that I touched on before Christmas. That linked with the group in Tadcaster and Sherborne that have been causing the antisocial behaviour and low level criminality tend to be the two main things, but it's certainly an area that I'll be giving some attention to.
And it seems to be that they're often spates and then they're dealt with, but they're frequent spates, often by different people, but it makes me just wonder what else might be at play. And I think they do get dealt with. So, and the same happened, I think, in Craven spate, and they get dealt with. But it doesn't seem as long term as Selby. That yeah, there you go. You can see it yourself now. But just we'll talk about that after the meeting again because we're running over. But it just struck us that Harrogate in particular and Selby are.
Yeah, I mean, just really briefly, conscious of time, the Harrogate issue. When you look at the crime types, they ebb and flow. So there's been a real spate around criminal damage. There was a spate around bicycle thefts. So there are different crime types. There isn't one persistent issue or one persistent crime type or offender or victim or patient, which makes it more challenging to police.
Very challenging. And does that reflect elsewhere? So I assume everywhere has those fluctuations, but they're not significantly higher than they have been in previous years. Does that make sense? I'm sure in, I don't know, Scarborough, you have a fluctuation of drugs, criminal damage, arson, but it never consistently reaches the red point, whereas in Harrogate and Selby it does. That's the only thing. So I totally agree. It's sort of sporadic and issue specific, but it's also consistent.
Yeah. So what's happening beneath
Yeah.
that? And we need to understand
Yeah.
that, which is a piece of work that we need to do.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, I won't make an action for it, but maybe just catch up outside the
Yeah,
meeting and figure out what we can talk to about that. I don't think I had any questions on the police performance side of it. I did on the mental health marker bit.
Yes.
Which I think is a slightly separate set of slides, isn't it?
Yeah.
Clearly, Bill's done some great work. We've jumped from 7% to 11% on the marker, and I didn't know what he did.
Right.
Effectively,
Okay.
and how far we still need to go. So clearly, that's a really good piece of work. But I imagine it was lots of hard work. And what's next?
Yes, without getting bogged down too much in terminology and the difference between markers, flags and tags. Essentially, when an incident's recorded by the police, we should mark it accordingly to reflect if it's been associated with mental health, for example. And the figures between December 2017 and January of 2018, whilst it's gone from 7% to 11%, actually if you look at the numbers themselves, 989 incidents had an occurrence with a mental health qualifier in December, and that has jumped to 1,617, so 500 odd jump in January. The reason for that is we've done a focused piece of work with the Force Control Room in terms of making sure, like the quality assurance process, I suppose, for want of a better word, to ensure that things are correctly logged. Even then, I think it's underrepresenting the totality of it.
Does it change the response those extra 500 odd people get? The fact they are understood by the police service to potentially need some mental health support?
No, it doesn't. It is my first initial response to that. This is more of an administrative type task.
More for us to know.
Yeah.
This is the sort of what we're
So the mental health workers in the Force Control Room will still, do their work with the Force Control Room staff. Street triage teams will still do their work, and the officers will still do their work. What we're trying to do is ensure that the work that we're doing and the demand that's placed on policing is accurately recorded.
Yeah, okay. So it's more of those strategic conversations to know.
Yeah. But there's a huge amount of work going on around the markers in the control room. So we still use Thrive regardless. So even if someone doesn't pick up a mental health marker, the vulnerability of that person is still picked up through Thrive, so I want to reassure the public, even if an admin marker doesn't go on, the job is still dealt with from a Thrive perspective. And secondly, we're trying to finesse the data. So if I suffer from a mental health condition that's cyclical, and I happen to report something to the police during a mental health episode, that's really relevant to how the police respond to me. But I then receive treatment, I'm in a stable phase, and I suffer a burglary, and I ring up to report the fact that I've been burgled, but it's got absolutely nothing to do with my mental health. The argument at the moment will be there's a mental health marker on that person because they have a mental health condition, but the thing they're reporting to us as the police doesn't require a mental health response, is not linked to my mental health because I'm taking medication and I'm stable. So we also need to be fairly flexible and very specific in how one we record it and the treatment or assessment of that job.
Yeah, it's about treated sensitively, isn't it? And not being binary effectively, which is what often stats and numbers want us to do.
So we still absolutely want to use Thrive and be bespoke to the service that person needs, rather than actually put a mental health marker on it, because they may have a cyclical condition even though it's not relevant on that occasion.
Okay.
The table below that then talks about, again with terminology, how incidents are tagged, and that's categorised by the type of incident there, and shows some interesting data there. So incidents that are concerned for safety, traps and so on, injury, illness. There were 1,041 such incidents in January, of which 45% had an element of mental health, and so on. And I won't go down all of them, but you'll see quite a considerable impact on the figures there. Some good news on the table below, the 1360 detentions.
Really
So
good.
these are people who are found in stress in the street, that officers detain for a mental health related issue. No people had to be taken to a police station in January, that should say January 18, or December, which is brilliant.
And young people even further back than that, which is great.
Yeah. And it really is quite good. The table below that talks about the street triage teams.
Yes, let's not get into the future of section 136 either at the present moment, but that's really good news.
And sorry, the next slide just gives a little bit more detail regarding section 136 detentions there, of which there were 27 in January of 2018, and then there's a breakdown per district provided there and what happened to those people that were detained by the police.
It's really helpful, certainly from sort of a commission point of view. The public might sort of question quite why it's quite so important, but on police vehicle usage for transportation of section 136 detainees.
Yes.
Do we have any idea of 8? I don't want to change the reporting mechanisms of it monthly again, but is 8 any better than normal? Because I know lots of work is on with trying to get ambulance to transport these people, because that's the...
So the partnership hub, the Force Control Room and the Nexus team are doing a piece of work on how we work with the Yorkshire Ambulance Service currently. The rule of thumb should be that if somebody's detained for a mental health related issue, they should be transported to section 136 suite, which is hospital health-based suite, by an ambulance. So we would not like to see police officers taking people in police vehicles, caged or otherwise, in those circumstances, but sometimes there are operationally legitimate reasons why we need to do so. We're working with partners to try and reduce those cases.
Thank you, Richard.
There's also a national piece of work ongoing with Yorkshire Ambulance Service and policing, and how we work in partnership and gathering that data.
Great. Well, any progress would be welcome. We'll leave that there then, Richard, thank you. I think that we'll move on, given time, to the one-on-one update. I don't know if that's you, please.
That's me again.
Richard again.
Keep going.
There we go.
That one?
Yeah.
Right, so again, standing agenda item at this meeting, the first slide shows the improvements in our 999 performance. So you will see there from January, there were 5,955 calls made using the 999 system. The speed of answer was 8.6 seconds. And if I just contrast that with, for example, the performance in June, it's quite strikingly different.
Really good work. I was down there the other day as well. It seemed slightly happier place to be. I know volume's lower, so the
Yeah.
real test hasn't come yet, but
I mean, there's a lot of work been, as you know, a lot of work been done. There is an absolutely direct correlation between call call volume and answer time and abandonment rates, and it's like that nationally. It's been like that forever. That there is, if you look at the usual hypothesis chart, there is a direct correlation, and it will have an impact.
I know we're continuing to invest in the control room. Is there any progression on the national work, if that's the right way to term it, on understanding the driver for the increase in volume?
We
It was all
haven't
very
had the
scratchy
feedback
head.
yet. The piece of work's being done, but I haven't seen anything yet in terms of the feedback from the national working group,
Obviously
if you
when
like,
that
that are
rise,
looking at that.
share it with us. But
The next slide is regarding the 101 performance, which again shows a similar improvement. I'm going to come on to some of the measures that we're putting in place to ensure we maintain that improvement throughout the summer period. But again, during the course of January, there were 19,259 phone calls made through to the court control room, and the average speed of answer.
I mean, it doesn't say how many people are working in December and January, but on the face of it, which is always risky, isn't it? But it's good news in the sense there were more calls in January, but the call waiting times were lower.
Yes.
Yes.
Because we've got staffing in
Yeah.
comparison with the same. If you looked earlier in the year and a similar number of calls, there weren't as many staff working in there.
So even between, I can't remember exactly when staff are starting. I know
Yeah.
it's relatively continuous, but
Yes.
was there a big jump in staffing between December and January?
It's not just about, between December and...
So the last two rows,
Yeah.
because clearly there's lots of work being done in the year, things like callback and operation, all those things, and staffing is increasing, but is also up and down depending on people moving on as well.
Yeah.
All things being equal, those last two rows are positive because call volume is up, but call answer time is quicker.
Yeah.
So it could be an indication that some of all the work that's being done has bedded in,
Yeah,
or it could just be
I
that
think
we had 10 more staff in the control room.
Well, I think the easiest answer is to say there are a number of variables at play
Yeah.
here as well. Because the switchboard facility was getting more embedded, the Qbus facility more embedded. There was undoubtedly an increased focus in terms of staffing and so on. So a multitude of things really, and I'll come on to some of the things moving
Go
forward. The next slide actually touches on the hull for operator on the switchboard functionality that we've introduced. Again, because this is a standing agenda item, the figures are there as they have previously been presented, but again, the January figures outlined there, calls presented 8,787, speed of answer 10.4 seconds, so this is to our switchboard facility, and again, an improved position using that, and that's something that North Yorkshire Police is going to maintain that service as well.
And I can't remember exactly. I know they're all agency staff doing that job at the moment.
Yes.
Are they to become permanent?
Yes, they are. So I'm going to come on to that shortly. So the current arrangements regarding that switchboard come to an end in March in terms of the temporary nature of it. We're going to recruit 6 members of staff, permanent members of staff, moving forward to sustain that moving forward. Okay. The next slide talks about Qbuster, which is essentially a callback system, so that if you phone the police up, you have an option of us calling you back. The figures are outlined there. The average time for call back in January was 11 minutes, which again is quite good. One of the other things we did, touching on towards the bottom of the slide there, is splitting our crime recording and occurrence management provision out, taking it out of the control room, because prior to this people were double hatting, taking calls and doing some of the admin work. We've done 6 months of that now to see how it's working. It's working. We're going to make that permanent.
I know we're focusing on the sort of call taking side of things,
Yeah.
and splitting them out had a positive impact on being
Yeah.
able to take calls quicker.
Yeah.
Will the same positive impact be seen on the crime recording?
Yes. So crime data integrity is coming to this meeting in April,
Yeah.
I think. And of course the data set from that, which has just been published, was from February through to about August, so during our
Middle.
when you look at the call volume handling, and then we moved Crom out, I think, round about August, September time. So yeah, I think we'll see the impact, a similar impact to that in terms of standards.
I've got a meeting on that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay, the next slide talks in quite a lot of detail about what we're doing around our recruitment plans moving forward. So first item, communication officers, 12 have been recruited, all now trained and accredited to perform their role. Further 16 comms officers have begun training 8th of January. They'll be accredited to carry out their role fully by the 23rd of March. I met with the Chief Inspector from the Control Room yesterday to discuss future plans. Courses are all booked in and the recruitment plans till 2019.
Right.
So I'm really sure there's a good process in place there to support the force control moving forward.
There's, you know, again, hats off for all the work that's been done on that, because you've, for want of a better phrase, chucked the kitchen sink at it, and I know the real test will be in the summertime when volume goes up again. But I don't think we can say you haven't tried to deal with that, but we'll have to wait and see whether how well it's really dealt with the issue. But it clearly a lot of work's been done, and I know staff is one element of it, but all the other stuff clearly has helped, if not on just customer service, then on the
and we will be increasing our establishment of call takers from 75 to 90. Okay, to ensure that we're able to meet the demand appropriately moving forward. In addition to that, we're doing some further building work with our force control room as well, to make sure that the staff that work in there have the proper facilities to train, work in, and so on moving forward.
I'm also happy to have seen a couple of your future dispatchers who have not started yet but got through the process are ex-cops or ex-police staff, so they've got a really good working knowledge of policing before they start as well, so hopefully they'll hit the ground running in that respect, and there's a good service in place.
We've also just had an audit on certain aspects of the control room in terms of the shift patterns being fit for purpose in terms of the public demand, so that will go to the audit committee and obviously be published. And you do call centre naturally see a high turnover of staff, and I think obviously there's a complicated training course because of the kit and equipment that we use, so there's always going to be a challenge for us in terms of keeping up those standards. So people may ask in the public, why are you recruiting, now your performance has got better, why are you doing all this recruitment? But actually the summer the demand goes up and the turnover is very difficult to replace immediately.
And we keep stealing from ourselves, don't we? We keep having successful control room staff becoming officers or PC services.
Yeah, we do. The dispatchers there, there's some bullet points there just talking about what we're doing around ensuring this. So the dispatchers are the people that deal with the radios essentially and make sure that officers and staff are deployed to the incidents in an appropriate manner. So 14 have been recruited, 6 of these currently in tutorship and will be accredited. Sorry, we're accredited to carry out their role by the 2nd of January, so that point's passed already, so that the resources have been shored up there. I could go on.
That's not Richard.
Okay.
I was hoping to finish by 4, and we're on my watch, which is slightly slow, already past 4. So I think the public can read what's going on. We've talked about it a lot as well. We talk about it every month. There's a lot of public domain. I think, as I say, we won't really know the success of all this work until we get to sort of early summer. So I suspect we're spending more time on this agenda item at that point in time. But we'll draw that agenda item to a close. Which brings on to the forward planner. So we've got digital next month, crime data integrity after that, stalking harassment after that. We will start to put in some future thematics as well, hopefully by the end of this week or next week. So the public can start to get involved in those. We'll publish those, all those papers as we always do a week or so before the meeting, and see what the public can get involved. Item 9. Simon, any questions from Twitter? No? Okay. Gosh. Good. Well, there's 24 questions that we can answer in the next couple of days on the website, so there's enough there to go at. Right, that was quick. Good. Any other business? No.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Really appreciate everybody's time and effort this afternoon, and I hope it was helpful for anybody tuning in. And see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.